In a cold and dark cave, a severely injured man falls to his knees. A figure in a green cloak helps the fallen man up, asking if he's okay. Meanwhile, a group of people with torches and weapons can be seen walking through the cave. Again, the man collapses to the ground. The whole group begins to lament, wondering how many people have collapsed so far. Despite his injuries, he rises again, asserting that everything is fine and they are the Empire's hope because the warrior Vern is with them. Then, at the forefront of the group, a warrior with short silver hair and huge armor is seen. He says he can hear the man's voice and asks him to hold on a little longer. Hopeful, the man gets up and reassures that he'll be fine. The warrior starts to think and mentions that everyone in the group is restless, adding that the attack group was formed by 74 people. However, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists in anger, he comments that only 43 men remain and that he lost 31 companions. Then, in a flashback, it is shown that during the battle, several knights were slain by magical beasts. Lamenting, he continues trapped in his thoughts, as even though everyone did their best, they couldn't protect their fallen comrades. Resigned and with a sad expression, he says that this is the reality and everyone was prepared for it. For this place is one of the 7 great evil dungeons, the Ancient Core. In the background, another warrior calls Vern and asks him to look in a direction. Astonished, Vern sees a huge door in front of him and internally celebrates for finally reaching the goal, explaining that this is the end of the dungeon and the last stop of the exploration and the end of all valiant efforts. This place contains various treasures and is where the 36th masterpiece created by humanity is located, and finally, is also where the boss of the place resides. A huge rumble shakes the entire room. Vern draws his sword, ordering all knights to stay in their positions. He then commands the squires and knights to stand in front and asks the mages to illuminate the place. The vibrations stop and all mages use illumination magic on the spot. As the lights come on, a huge creature is revealed. The gigantic creature opens its 4 eyes and Vern stands before it. Looking at the ancient monster in front of him, the hero remains in shock. The beast rises and with overwhelming pressure, freezes everyone present. Vern begs everyone to run while stating they have no chance of winning. Some time passes and we see a skull conversing with the giant creature. The creature explains the situation, confirming that it was sleeping when the humans suddenly invaded and then it defeated them. The skull questions if that's all he had to say while remaining motionless. Answering yes, the monster emphasizes that it fought against 2 opponents, being their exhaustion and the invaders. It continues and asks the skeleton, Patrick, to calm down as he was exuding death and anger. Extremely irritated, Patrick asks how he could calm down when the giant only woke up after the humans had already invaded the place. Affirming that it was yawning in front of the enemies, he continues to complain with the ancient being. The skeleton emphasizes that the whole problem is their boss's mentality and looking to the side, asks Rinna what she thinks about the situation. The white-haired woman, dressed as a maid, says she doesn't know but affirms she's extremely impressed that her master subdued the humans with just a yawn and praises the creature. Seeing this cheesy situation, the knight Patrick gets even more irritated. He says they should just give up and the dungeon is completely finished. The giant monster says he should stop being annoyed or his bones will rot. The 7 dungeons that humans temporarily decided were impossible to invade, this is one of them. This is the Ancient Core. In this world, humans successfully invade and conquer most of the local dungeons inhabited by hostile creatures. While these beings can prepare an attack whenever they want, monsters can only defend themselves. The repetition of the war between the 2 races negatively affects and weakens the habitat of these beasts. During a period, several dungeons were conquered and others created. However, there are some that even humans couldn't dominate. They were considered so cruel and mysterious that they were called the 7 evil dungeons. They had to be put on hold, considered impossible to conquer. Among these 7, there is the Ancient Core, considered the most evil of all. The Ancient Core has defense monsters, and among them are the Guardians who defend the 3 different paths. First, the red path on the left, defended by a terrible homunculus called the Maiden Blade Renee. Second, the central blue path, defended by a scary skeleton, the Death Knight Patrick. And finally, the path on the right is dirty, mysterious, and has no information other than the existence of an unknown number of tentacles. The being that dominates this entire place is known as Swallow, an ancient monster. Then we see a maiden with white hair closing the book and saying that this was how it was written. She explains that after spreading these books to humans, a number of invaders in the area increased. A creature next to her was clapping and explaining that the way to keep the dungeons safe was to envelop them in mysteries. Therefore, they spread the books to give some information and thus make the humans feel confident, leading them to recklessly venture in when in fact most of the information is false. However, even the creature could not believe that so many humans would come, totaling 74 who are now dead. The homunculus maid reports that most of the equipment was lost because it was melted by the 116 black tentacles, and even though the remaining ones were expensive, if she had been in place of the tentacles, she would have managed without damaging anything. While agreeing, the ancient giant monster assumes a humanoid form of medium stature and dark hair. Upon completing the transformation, he caresses her head, affirming that he is sure she would succeed. During this moment, a skeletal being appears in the background and says they are there for a meeting, not to play around. Patrick laughs and says that the situation is so sweet, it could give him cavities. He then continues, saying it could even rot his skeletal skull. The skeleton questions why the giant monster transforms if he can't even do it successfully, showing that he has 6 fingers. Still, Patrick claims it's better than the last time when his human form had more than 40 teeth and was extremely strange, sending shivers down the spine. Meanwhile, the homunculus complains to the skeleton that the sound of his jaw was too loud, creating a tense atmosphere between the two. After that, the knight says he can't take it anymore and that he shouldn't be a guardian anymore. After a while, we see Renee with papers announcing that she will cite the main points. We see the 3 beings sitting at a round table, and the homunculus continues her speech. The girl reports that humans are already trying to dominate the path on the right, causing severe injuries to the 116 tentacles that protected that route. Swallow interrupts her, affirming not to worry because the tentacles can regenerate. However, they can find another guardian temporarily. Smiling, the skeleton begs his boss to look for more than one guardian because he wanted him to quit this position, but Swallow denies it, emphasizing that he will be his slave for the rest of his life. Then he continues explaining that due to the damage suffered, humans will only traverse the path on the right now. Patrick says they might be preparing another attack group, while Renee explains that due to communication spells, the information about the path on the right may have already spread. Hitting the table, the boss says they will create a counter strategy and thus switch tasks. The monster then orders Renee to leave the left path and go protect the right path. He continues saying that the attack groups will go to the right path thinking there is an opening, and she affirms she will defend the route from any enemy. Thus, he asks Patrick to replace Renee on the path she was protecting, then the knight questions him. Explaining, he says that when the humans realize Renee is on the right path, they will change route to the left path and Patrick will be there to protect it. Finishing, he states that this way they will be able to defend against attacks. After this, the skeleton asks what will happen if they choose the middle path and Swallow stands still, not knowing what to answer. Silence settles in the place and the ancient monster says there is nothing to do. The humans will have a direct encounter with him. The skeletal knight wonders what kind of half-baked plan this is. Maid Renee interrupts him and praises the master's plan while looking at him proudly. Renee proceeds, saying that the most urgent matter has been resolved and they just need to decide how they will handle the sword to conclude the meeting. We then see Swallow showing that he doesn't know which sword she is referring to, and then Patrick says it is the sword of the leader of the attack group they defeated. Reporting, he states that the sword is of the highest quality and that the humans who came this time were strong. Again, the boss asks which sword they were referring to, and Patrick comments that he has probably heard of it. The knight then takes the sword and says is one of the 36 virtuous works that range from items to weapons that are of extreme quality and well known by humans. Continuing, he states that this was the 14th work and its name was Tanabella. Al reports that some of them are in their warehouse. We then see that the blade Renee uses is one of these works. The skeleton asks what they should do with the sword, stating that it's no use giving it to any creature in the dungeon as it would be a waste. He then says that the boss should keep the sword, but Swallow denies, saying that Patrick also used a sword, so he could keep it. For a while, the skeleton remains motionless in disbelief, then asks if it's serious. After the master's confirmation, the knight celebrates and shows immense happiness, saying he has no choice but to accept. This is the demonic core, a terrible place where a frightening homunculus maiden resides, a death knight who exudes terror, as well as the home of a giant ancient monster. The meeting continues, and Renee asks what they should do with the rest of the items they obtained in battle. Swallow says they will use what they can, and the remaining objects will be used as bait to lure new victims. Renee states that the master doesn't need to worry because she will carefully handle the distribution. However, Patrick believes she will do a sloppy job again, and Swallow tells him to trust her. The homunculus begins to elaborate on what they would do since no monster needs equipment or magical items. An idea then arises, and she suggests they should market mana stones to humans and thus get gold. Then the boss says that since that's the case, you will go to the human village. The two servants are amazed in a euphoric manner. Patrick suggests that Renee should go instead, while the girl quickly agrees. The monster then asks why he shouldn't go, and Patrick points out that he is extremely disastrous at maintaining a human form. He then points out that his boss is currently exposing his monstrous tail. Even though irritated, the ancient monster agrees and asks the maid to bring him food. We then see Renee covered by a cloak, walking amidst a beautiful forest, enjoying the weather. She then assumes a more childish expression as she tells her lord that she's already going. After a while, Renee is seen in a jewelry store with mana stones on a counter. A huge man examines the magical stones the girl brought and says that unfortunately, he won't be able to buy them. With a threatening expression, the girl asks why he won't buy them. He then takes out a Class B mana stone, showing that it's small compared to the one she brought. He explains that an average champion would take around 10 years to gather enough to get one of these. And then he reports that the ones she brought are of such extreme quality that they can only be used by very high-level mages. Finally, he states that a jeweler who has a contract with the royal family or even a magic tower could buy these stones. The pensive girl states that the capital is too far away and the closest one is a magic tower. She mentions that she didn't want to go to one, but since it's for her master, she would make that sacrifice. Then the girl quickly says goodbye to the man, and he bids her to take care during the journey. Before she leaves, he mentions that there's still one stone left on the counter. Thanking him, the girl says it's a gift for the information, and then says goodbye again, leaving through the door. Strange behavior for the young girl he ignores. Some time passes, and Rene finally arrives at the magic tower and is faced with a huge structure. A man in a trench coat greets the girl. He mentions that if she wants to sell mana stones, she could talk to the guild master and says he will guide her to where he is. The girl simply agrees. As she climbs the stairs, Rene realizes that this structure is similar to a dungeon, with the master residing at the top. Upon reaching the guild master's quarters, she is greeted by a woman with long red hair. The woman thanks Rene for coming and introduces herself as the leader of the Graumatis Armor Tower. She then asks to Rene as well, letting some of her mana overflow. Rene thinks the woman has a great deal of power and quickly introduces herself as Ren, sitting in a chair across from the woman. The leader states that she would ignore the girl for being a child, but the guard had reported that the girl had brought several mana stones. With an air of superiority, the woman asks if Ren knows the reputation of this magic tower and if she has high-level mana stones that would be suitable for them. Rene then asks her to see for herself and promptly pours the stones onto the table. Seeing the quality and size of the stones, the woman is amazed. In her thoughts, she considers that those stones are of a rank. She concludes that these stones stand out even compared to higher quality mana stones and that this is something a child should not possess. Still startled, Graumatis wonders who this child could be. After that, the woman asks where she got these stones from. Trying to figure out the origin of these stones, she analyzes the girl. Then memories of a family with silver hair among the 8 great houses of the empire come to her mind. The woman then assumes that Ren is part of that family and ran away from home secretly bringing the stones there. According to her, this is the only possibility for a child to possess something like this, and even if she is a noble lady, the world is dark and treacherous. The woman apologizes to Ren and mentions that she could never have imagined that they would be stones of such quality. She then states that she wants to buy all of them, offering 50 gold coins for each and 80 for the particularly good ones. Ren ponders what the man at the jewelry store had informed her. The homunculus then reasons that a champion earns about 10 gold coins per year. So in 10 years, it would be 100 gold coins just to acquire a B rank one. With a threatening expression, the girl says that if the woman is trying to steal from her, she will kill her. The tower leader then notices that the girl is smarter than she imagined. Thinking, she affirms that in reality, even if she used all the tower's money, it wouldn't be enough to buy all the stones. Scared by the aura Ren is emitting, the woman quickly states that she will try to buy as many as she can. With the chest in hand, she offers 2,000 gold coins because that's all they have. Continuing the offer, she says she could also add valuable items to buy all the stones. Ren then asks if she guarantees the quality of the items, to which the woman affirms that she doesn't need to worry about that. The tower leader then asks Rene to follow her so she can show her the items. As they walk towards the place, she comments that that place is forbidden to strangers, but they will make an exception for the girl. Upon arriving in the room, she explains that it's the tower's warehouse. She then begins to show the items they have. First, a tiara made of diamond with magical stones in the center, useful for mages. Second, a living black pearl in a ring that emits crying sounds if the person approaches any type of poison, explaining that the pearl is the work of alchemy. Ren then looks irritably at the pearl, while the leader continues speaking, mentioning that she already imagined it wouldn't match the girl's tastes because alchemy is not a clean discipline and several people feel disgusted because of it. So to change the subject, she shows a heart-shaped orc called the Scarlet Love Stone, stating that it's a jewel that makes love a reality. Upon hearing what the tower leader said, Ren's eyes fill with brightness. The leader then explains that all one needs to do is infuse mana into the jewel in front of the person they love, and thus the spirit in the jewel will bring eternal love between the two. The girl then approaches the jewel and asks if that's true. Graumatis affirms it is and swears in the name of the magic tower. Soon after, the woman asks if that jewel meets the girl's tastes. Excited, Ren repeats yes and accepts that jewel. Seizing an opportunity, the leader says that unfortunately she doesn't know if she can give that jewel away because it could even dominate an emperor's heart, making it invaluable. Irritated and determined, Ren bites her own lips. Decided, she then offers her blade, one of the 36 masterpieces, in exchange for the Scarlet Love Stone. The tower leader is completely shocked and asks how the girl had that. Ren then continues and offers her blade along with the previous jewels for the said Scarlet Love Stone. The scene cuts and we see one of the tower mages questioning if the leader had really given the crystal to the girl. With a smile on her face as she hummed, she affirms she did. He asks why she did that, saying that if the girl used the crystal, she would inevitably die. Then, while cruelly analyzing the magical stones, she mentions she doesn't care. She then states that the knave girl made the exchange willingly and spontaneously. The mage insists that even so, it was cruel. With a wicked smile, the woman then tells the mage not to worry. She adds that there would be no problems because the unlucky young girl will die as soon as the curse is released. Thus, the person she loves will also die, meaning there will be no clue left of what happened. The scene cuts, and we see Renee walking with a slight smile while carrying the jewel in a bag. Finally, the leader says she doesn't know who the unfortunate ones are, but she feels sorry for whoever is affected by the crystal's curse. Then it shows one of the 7 dungeons, a huge castle called Chait. Inside it, there's a frightening red-haired woman with long nails holding scissors. She then makes a quick move, and we see a strand of silver hair fall. After that, Renee was sitting in a chair in front of a mirror while the woman cuts her hair. The girl apologizes for coming without prior notice, saying she's in debt, and then thanks the woman for always helping her. Saying there's no problem because neighbors should always help each other, the woman mentions loving to see the cuteness of the young girl. The great woman is named Ursabet and is the chief of the Chait dungeon. Now with a cute expression, Ursabet says Renee will look wonderful no matter what while the girl appears shy. Putting away the Kong she was using, she invites Ren's race for never aging and always having a beautiful face. Renee then points out that the redhead woman also looks extremely young and has even paler skin than hers. Even though feeling flattered, the girl warns she uses various beauty products and blood to stay this way. Due to this, we see in the background some pots stained with blood and with human skulls inside. The homunculus then asks Vittori what the girl thinks of her, while the woman is mildly surprised. She then asserts that Renee is the most beautiful girl she's seen lately, making the girl blush. She then continues, ensuring that no one would be able to reject the girl as she is now, and caresses the homunculus's face. In doubt, she then questions who she was getting dressed up for so much, wondering if Renee was going to confess to someone. The girl then confirms it while blushing, looking at the Scarlet Heart. In a state of shock, the girl quickly asks who she would do that for. With eyes completely in love, she soon says it would be for her Lord Swallow. Even more confused, Vittori asks if Renee was joking. Confidently, she says there was no joke and affirms she will do it. As she taps her own head, she asks what the girl saw in him, since in her view the monster is not at all attractive. With a passionate expression, she recounts that she likes several things about him and adds that he is extremely strong. She agrees with Renee and asserts that maybe he is the strongest being in the world, but it's all negated by the enormous laziness he possesses. Ironically, she agrees and also says he has a huge body and eats like a glutton. She also says he sleeps all day, is insensitive, and has even gained more weight. The incredulous vampire asks if even after all that she still likes Lord Swallow. Her eyes shine as she affirms yes, and that she really likes him a lot. Bathory then says she understands and that there's no problem wishing her the best. She just emphasizes that Renee deserved something better. Then she winks and says the homunculus can come to her if Swallow rejects her. Thanking the girl, she promises she will succeed and quickly hugs the heart-shaped stone. The scene then cuts to a gigantic castle in the imperial capital called Laiz. We see the dungeon's subjugation alliance in a meeting. A man with an extremely serious expression reports that the hero Vern Hishtalt's attack group may have been annihilated. Everyone around him starts to clamor. Soon, an irritated nobleman stands up and says the man had given assurance that the dungeon guardian would be defeated. Another nobleman mentions that they didn't find the bodies, so how can the messenger be so sure they were dead? Agreeing, another person says that hero Vern would never fall before monsters. A man is with his hands supporting his chin as he looks down. Reflective, he thinks that everyone speaking is completely wrong. In his thoughts, he says that the ancient core dungeon is not big or complicated. As he continues to think that it's been 2 days since they last heard from them, Vern is probably already dead. Grinding his teeth, the man asks the messenger where Vern's sword was. The man says their communication with the attack group was cut off when they reached the dungeon center. Unless they reached that area, it would be impossible to retrieve the 14th work, Annabella. A huge argument ensues, and some believe they should hurry and send a second group. However, others believe that if not even Vern could do it, they would only waste more lives. The discussion continues, and one of the nobles says they shouldn't give up easily because if Vern fought, he must have injured the dungeon boss. During the discussion, most think they should gather all forces and attack while they're reorganizing. Then the man looks down again and starts to think. With this attack mission, one of the precious heroes and one of the masterpieces belonging to the royal family were lost. Restless, he thinks that if the second team fails, his head is in danger, but if they do nothing, the royal family will be furious. He then claims that if Vern didn't manage to seriously injure the dungeon boss, and if the attack team didn't make a great impact on the dungeon, it would be impossible to conquer the ancient core regardless of how many times they try. A huge silence remains in the room until suddenly an unknown figure arrives. He questions why the old man thinks that way and argues that the dungeon would be easily conquered. The old man then stands up excitedly and asks what the Imperial Research Association is doing there. We then see 3 people dressed in a cloak with eye details on the chest. 2 of them have hoods covering their heads and hiding their faces, and the other is a short young man with purple hair. He then asks if they don't know whose orders they follow. These 3 people are part of the Imperial Magical Research Association, the 3 Eyes. The old man then becomes irritated, and in his thoughts says the royal family has already begun to interfere. The young man then continues his speech and clarifies that because of the 3 Eyes being there, everyone in the room will pay for their sins. He insults the nobles and mentions that besides losing a precious hero, they threw one of the Majesty's masterpieces into the enemy's den. A perpetual silence hangs over, and everyone there keeps their heads down and nervous. However, he says that he couldn't kill everyone there, and if he did, there would be no one to coordinate the countless attack teams of the Empire. Then the king made a proposal so that everyone there can survive. Smiling, he declares that they will attack the ancient core once again. The old man then questions because not even the hero Vern managed to defeat the dungeon. He then gives a disturbing smile and opens his arms, saying the word Nephrim. Everyone in the room questions the decision as he asserts once again that they will use Nephrim. The old man remembers that Nephrim is a hybrid with many flaws, but the young man with purple hair asserts that it's not, and that Nephrim is a very successful product. He continues and slams his hand on the table while bringing his face closer to the man. He then explains why Vern and his team failed to survive the ancient core, and it's not because they are weak or incompetent. They were just missing one thing, something that neither Vern nor his team had. And whoever possesses that something is Nephrim, as a young man with blonde hair is shown. We then see Swallow, who sneezes, commenting that he's feeling something bad. He says he feels like a big storm is approaching while sneezing again, returning to his monster form. He then wonders if he had fallen ill. Now Swallow was lying on the floor, saying he was feeling lazy and didn't want to patrol anymore. But he remembers that humans can appear at any moment, and if he doesn't continue, Patrick will probably scold him again. Remembering the night, he expresses that even as a skeleton, he is quite terrifying and scary. Still murmuring about how he didn't want to do this, he gets up. Soon, the monster remembers that the last time humans attacked was through the right path, so he heads there. Upon arriving at his destination, Swallow comes across the tentacles that were regenerating. The guy regrets not being able to do anything to help, so he continues his patrol. Upon reaching the 5th room, it's possible to see a monster made of huge vines connected to a core called Anthropophago. Analyzing its injuries, he remembers that this creature regenerates itself if his core is intact. Taking a closer look, he noticed that the creature's core remains intact, so it will recover without intervention. Descending from the monster, he explains that the problems must be in the remaining rooms because in these, the beasts were massacred. Yanani says he'll have to discuss this with Patrick, however, just imagining that he'll receive another scolding already regrets it. We see that the ancient core is formed by 5 rooms, the 5th being responsible for giving access to the 3 paths that ultimately lead to Swallow's quarters. Sleepy Swallow affirms that he'll think about the rest later because he already checked the right path in the 5th room and everything was fine. As he returns, Swallow says he finished his patrol and that Patrick would understand if he went to rest. However, a blade passes by his side, almost hitting him. When the blade hits the wall, the ancient monster begins to release his aura, preparing for combat. He says that now that they've invaded that place, he would have to eliminate everyone and then turns around. Turning around, he sees Rene apologizing. She explains that she mistook him for a human invader. Apologizing again to Swallow, she dispels her aura and confirms that it was just his subordinate. Saying it's okay, he mentions that he was just surprised. Observing the girl, he notices she was different than usual. Proud and with shining eyes, she asks if she looked beautiful. Stuttering and extremely nervous, the man only mentions that she seemed to be dressed for a special occasion. In his thoughts, Swallow worries that the girl might resign. While twirling her finger through her hair, she confirms that she was indeed dressed for a special occasion. Then the girl asks Swallow to accompany her. Still nervous, he confirms and in his thoughts begs that she isn't resigning. After a while, we see the two in another part of the cave. In the center of the place, there's a table and 2 chairs. Rene says that was a secret place that only she knew in the dungeon. She continues and asks the boy to sit while she fetches some tea. Obeying, he goes to the chair and sits on it. Serving the tea, Rene mentions that formerly only she knew that place, but now it's a secret they both share. Worried, he continues to plead in his thoughts for her not to resign. Continuing, she says that it's been 80 years since her boss took her in and asks if he remembers. Looking at his reflection in the tea, he confirms that he remembers. It's revealed that 80 years ago, more than 1,000 dungeons were subdued and thousands of humans invaded the ancient core. It was at that time that Rene earned her nickname and was adopted by Swallow. Relieved that she didn't resign, he says that the girl has been through a lot and asked if her red eye was okay. She says she's happy because he remembered her eyes again. The man then emphasizes that he always remembers. The girl affirms she's very happy to have protected him all this time. Swallow starts to get nervous again and sweat, mentioning that it felt like a farewell. Shyly, the girl calls him by his name. Thoughts in his mind plead for her not to resign. While his head can only think of that, suddenly the girl finally confesses and says she likes him. Without reaction, he asks what she had said. With gleaming eyes, she repeats that she loves him, and continues saying that for the past 80 years she's been waiting for this moment. Completely confused, he thanks her for saying that. However, he begins to explain that creatures like them are always on the brink of death, and that's why he believes neither of them wants the other to live the rest of their life in loneliness. Clutching her dress, she says she knew it would be like this. She emphasizes that she just wanted to lift the burden that weighed so heavily on her. Still, the girl thinks the idea of being rejected after a confession is terrifying. So while taking out the Scarlet Love Jewel, she asserts that she wants to be loved by him at any cost. The homunculus violently kicks the table away and says in front of Swallow that she would stoop so low as to use something like that. The guy asks the girl to calm down. With confidence, she mentions that with this, her wish will be fulfilled and shows the jewel to him. Swallow widens his eyes, and as Rene was about to infuse her mana into the object, the ancient monster releases a crushing pressure. His whole aura begins to dominate and spread throughout the place. The beast takes on a monstrous form and asks Rene in a frightening manner if she'd try to kill him. Paralyzed, she lets the object she was holding fall from her hands, causing it to shatter. Crying, the girl wonders what that was. Observing, she notices something resembling a vast darkness trapped in the jewel. Patrick smiles and mockingly praises his master. Mocking Swallow, he walks around the creature saying he's looking for the monster's conscience. He continues, mentioning that not only did he frighten the humans, he managed to drive away even his servant. While laughing wickedly, he claims that his boss couldn't even contain his anger in front of Rene. Swallow remains lying with a sad expression, and with Patrick by his side, the monster asks what he should do. The knight says he shouldn't be questioning him since he wasn't the cause of all this. Still, he mentions that the blame isn't entirely on his master, while breaking another remaining piece of the jewel. However, he points out that his boss is still responsible for everything he did with the skeleton, and lifts the ear of the ancient monster who tried to ignore it. Swallow pretends not to understand and claims not to remember doing anything against Patrick. Then we see a flashback of the recent events. The knight runs desperately towards the two to try to prevent something bad from happening to Rene. Swallow is surrounded by a terrifying darkness, and the girl is lying on the ground. Patrick keeps running while asking his master to calm down. However, when the knight looks, the boy is already completely consumed by rage, with half of his face transformed. Rena is lying before her master, crying and completely paralyzed, wondering what she did. Even though Patrick asks her to control herself and leave the place, the girl remains unmoving. In his thoughts, he realizes he won't be able to reach the girl, and if she continues like that, she'll only get in the way. So determined, the skeleton draws his sword and attacks Rene, throwing her away. Apologizing in his thoughts, he says there was no other way to get her out of there. Upon realizing that he managed to drive the girl away, he turns and looks at his master. Observing, he notices that the monster is already completely consumed by anger, and soon the skeleton wonders what he should do. In a state of insanity, Swallow asks if Patrick was also trying to kill him. After that, we return to the present moment with Patrick finishing refreshing his master's memories. Swallow seems embarrassed, and the skeleton asks if the monster can now remember what happened. The boss then apologizes while covering his face with his hands. Patrick, who is by his side, reassures him and says it was good he apologized, and he understands why the monster reacted that way. Then he mentions that it had to be that out of all possible things while looking at the fragments of the jewel on the ground. Swallow then asks if he should go look for Rene, and Patrick affirms that he doesn't need to ask the obvious. The monster says he questioned because he thought Patrick would scold him. Confused, Patrick asserts he would never say that, emphasizing that Rene is extremely important to the dungeon. Then he begins to list all the functions performed by the homunculus. They include delivering ingredients for everyone's meals in the dungeon, cleaning, restoring, and replenishing monsters, and even setting traps. She also managed the entire profitable system of the dungeon, and all other management aspects were handled by her. The skeleton also states that losing her would be worse than losing the boss himself. Swallow says he was already aware, however, hearing all that left him more shocked. Patrick asks his boss to find and bring her back at any cost. If necessary, he would even have to bow his head and beg for her to return or even kiss her shoes. While listening to all this and agreeing, the giant polymorphic monster returns to a humanoid form. The skeleton then suggests that if his master is going to look for her, he should take an object and extends his hand. He mentions that it's the Dumura, a bracelet that helps stabilize mana. Continuing, he asserts that Swallow doesn't need to know the details, just that the bracelet is quite expensive. The boss still remains somewhat confused about what that was. The knight then explains that he can't guarantee that the effect will work fully because the monster has a huge mana flow. He shows that his master has 6 fingers again and continues explaining that the object should at least prevent the monster's body from pulsating badly in human form. The master looks at Patrick, mentioning that it's a very high level of preparation as if he knew that would happen. He continues asking where the skeleton got it, to which he replies he found it on the ground. Patrick, with an uncomfortable expression, asks his master not to do anything strange with the object because it's fragile. Finally, the monster puts on the bracelet. Swallow asks Patrick to take care of the place in his absence. Patrick reminds him that it's not a stroll and that he should return because in 5 days the humans will return. The dungeon boss then asks if the skeleton wants him to return before the attack group reaches the dungeon, while Patrick confirms. Patrick says that if he couldn't ward off the intruders while the ancient monster is away, he doesn't know what could happen. With confidence, the knight says with certainty that the humans won't invade for 5 days and asks his master to remember that. In his humanoid form, Swallow conjures a coat over himself and affirms that he will return with Rina within 5 days. Patrick reinforces that if he approaches human villages, he should try not to attract attention as it would cause discord. Swallow comments that it's okay and starts to head out of the dungeon. Before leaving, he asserts with a wicked smile that if things go wrong, he will cause chaos and return to the dungeon. Annoyed, Patrick asks him to stop acting like that. We then see the skeleton muttering and then saying that things are starting to complicate. He sees on a paper that Renee's weapon is being auctioned by the humans. In other words, Renee possibly handed over the decapitated tooth, which was one of the 36 masterpieces somewhere, and in return brought a mana stone containing a demon. It also asserts that because of this, she almost got killed by the boss himself, who lost control because of it. The skeleton says he knows what will happen and imagines his lord devouring several people and causing the apocalypse. Trying to calm down, the knight says it's still too early for humanity to perish, while holding a piece of newspaper in his hand. As he continues reading the newspaper, the skeleton is startled to see that the attack group will invade the dungeon in just 3 days. Remembering what he said to his master, the knight becomes desperate. He remembers he told his master to return in 5 days, and with a worried expression, he says he's screwed. We then see Swallow lying in the middle of a crater after failing his teleportation. The guy grumbles that he teleported to a random location. He then realizes that the cause of this is the bracelet he's wearing, responsible for keeping his mana controlled, asserting that he will try again. Swallow picks up using his shadows for support. We then see that the coordinates he wishes to teleport to is the place where Renee was and sold the mana stones to the city of Hastron. As he gets up, he uses his powers of darkness to teleport again. In another distant location, we can see a woman with wings and demonic horns sitting on a throne. She congratulates the invaders who managed to reach there and then says that in return, she would give them an honorable death. Then a man stands before her, ironizing and stating that the woman is too proud for someone in the demon race. With confidence, the man draws his sword and explains that everyone there is part of an attack group calling themselves the elite mercenaries of the Dawn Tiger Empire, a group ranked 32nd in the imperial ranking. The mercenary asserts that soon the whole world will know their group, saying he will overthrow the demon from her throne. Looking at the humans with a superiority air, the demon woman calls them fools. While standing up and taking her staff, she asserts to be the 17th descendant of the demon king Asmodeus. Her name is Mels de Linf-Agrier, and she takes a battle stance. While smiling, she asks the humans to be happy to hear her name before they die. The man continues with a confident posture and smiles. He then immediately charges, wielding his sword and throwing a blade in her direction. The woman easily defends herself by spinning her spear while looking down on him. The mercenary is impressed to see that she defended his attack so easily. A hooded mage conjures a spell and at the same time asserts to his leader that he will provide the necessary support. Irritated, the woman prepares an attack with her spear and offends the humans, calling them insignificant beings. She then conjures with her spear huge purple flames and throws them towards all the mercenaries. The team leader uses his sword to drive into the ground and throws the debris up, defending himself from the attack. While defending himself from the flames, he is amazed to see ice particles. Then he realizes that the demon had already conjured another spell. The woman then finishes a glacial spell. During the spell casting, the mercenary throws debris still in the air, affirming he wouldn't let her cast another spell. Soon he also advances toward the woman with the intention to attack her. However, the woman had already finished the spell and throws ice spikes towards the man. Yet, a barrier forms in front of him, defending him from the ice attacks, while the woman becomes confused. She believes she had already defeated the mages and looks in their direction. Startled, she sees that even though injured, they are still supporting their leader. Irritated, she notices the man advancing in front of her, then reinforces her sharp hands with a fire spell. The two are charging forward, and when they were about to collide, they hit something else. We then see several debris being thrown up while the two opponents are thrown backward. Still confused, they wonder what happened as suddenly something appeared between them. Amidst the smoke, we see a figure rising. The other mercenaries help their leader stand while confirming if he's okay. The leader says he's fine and asks who appeared because he didn't know another attack group was coming. The woman then stands up, wondering if the attack group grew. Startled, she asserts that if those who arrived can easily cross the Demon King's castle, they must be strong. While wondering who it was, the smoke begins to disperse, revealing a figure. It's then possible to see Swallow with an imposing posture. He turns and looks at the mercenary in the room, asking if they knew where the city of Harston is. Faced with such an unusual situation, everyone in the room is perplexed, not understanding what happened. Irritated, the demon and the mercenary question what that man was talking about. The demon then supposes he's an enemy because of his human appearance and orders him to stay away because she's a demon king. She continues speaking confidently for everyone in the room to hear that regardless of how many humans come, she will defeat them all. Swallow then gets lost in his thoughts, questioning if that woman was really a demon king. According to him, the demon kings he had encountered were much more frightening and imposing. Continuing his reasoning, he concludes that the difference between this demon king and the ones he faced must be generational. Still irritated, the demon screams that she will punish everyone there for destroying her property, while the mercenary retorts, saying he will defeat her. After that, we see a group of humans approaching, and the mercenaries affirm that it's the support group. Swallow was about to ask again when the city of Harston is, but he is interrupted by the humans advancing against the demon. While continuing to try to ask where the city is, the humans and the demon exchange several barbs and insults. Then the leader of the mercenaries defends against an attack and tells his group they don't need to be afraid because they now have support. As the battle continues, Swallow continues to be ignored to the point of getting irritated. He asserts he's had enough while showing a dissatisfied expression. Again, the guy gets up while thinking he needs to find Rinette as soon as possible, and that it's no use trying to ask the humans there. Continuing his thought, he affirms that any delay, he knows Patrick will scold him. The mercenaries in the background believe he's also part of the support group and soon ask if he's going to help or if he's scared. Irritated, Swallow orders them to shut up and immediately assumes his monstrous form. As he transforms, he attacks all the humans who were there. Completely horrified, everyone tries to escape because they know they can't win. However, Swallow mercilessly captures and devours all the mercenaries. After this massacre, the monster returns to his human form and walks towards the woman. The demon remains paralyzed, completely confused by the scene she saw. The silence is broken by a belch from Swallow, which momentarily startles the woman. She then, still confused, asks what Swallow had done. She asserts that it was extremely powerful, and that with that power, he was certainly much stronger than her. The woman's eyes then fill with intense brightness. She says she's very interested in him. Excitedly, the demon analyzes Swallow's entire body while asking what his true identity is and how he's so strong. Without saying anything, the man makes a disdainful expression. However, even seeing this response, the woman remains extremely excited. Faced with that, she apologizes and then introduces herself properly. Striking a flamboyant pose, she reveals that she's a demon king and the 17th daughter of Asmodeus, and her name is Mels de Linfgray. She then asks again what the name of the man in front of her is. With an even more disgusted expression, Swallow says he hates the whole situation. However, realizing he has little time to waste on trivial matters, he soon tries to introduce himself. But the guy hesitates and begins to reason. He realizes that if he reveals his identity, the news could spread quickly. So in order to get out of that situation, he tries to come up with a new name. Without creativity, he introduces himself as Swallow Roundeer. Trying to seem more convincing, he gives a thumbs up to the woman while thinking that this name is terrible, but it will do. Upon hearing the name, her eyes fill with brightness again, and she asks for permission to call the man Lord Swallow. She then quickly thanks him for coming to save her. Swallow says it's no problem, even knowing it wasn't intentional. The girl makes a sulky expression and thanks him again, affirming that if he hadn't helped her, she could be dead. The girl then smiles, saying she wants to repay the favor. The man then smiles and thanks her, asking immediately after if the girl knows where the city of Harston is. Confidently, Swallow celebrates for having chosen correctly and eliminated only the humans. However, to Swallow's disappointment, the woman asks him what Harston is. In a few seconds, the man completely changes his expression to disappointment. He realizes that the demon didn't even know what Harston meant. Irritated, he thinks he asked the worst person possible. Already discouraged, he asks where the nearest human village is. She responds that the nearest human village is called Liege. Pensive, he asks if Liege is the imperial capital. Unfortunately, he soon realizes that Liege is 2 months away from the city where Rene is likely to be. Frustrated, the man falls to the ground, completely hopeless, realizing he made a big mistake. The woman quickly asks what happened and if he's okay. Upon hearing the word mistake, she realizes that he probably wants to go to a distant city, so she suggests he use the teleportation hub. Confused, Swallow asks what that is. The woman explains that it's something created by humans through magic and alchemy, and as far as she knows, this object has the technology to transfer someone through space. Swallow gets up and asks where this hub is. The girl then comments that the hub is in the imperial capital. Swallow and Mels arrive in Liege. He questions if that would be the famous center of the imperial capital. The girl, extremely excited, confirms it and asserts that there's no better place to gather information. Swallow doesn't think he'll find Rene there but needs to gather information since he's not sure where she is. Mels then confirms if the one Swallow was looking for was a girl with silver hair. The man, crestfallen, affirms it is. The woman asks him not to worry because she will help him find the girl. He asks if she is the lady of the Demon King's castle and if it's okay for her to leave the castle. With a slight smile, she thanked him for his concern. Mels explains that she is a demon born to rule, so regardless of where she is, it's considered demon territory and all demons are her soldiers. Swallow then asks if that's a demon king's power and if she can freely gather all demons. The girl proudly confirms the man's theory. However, she says that although it is, she never tried to use such power. With a quick change of expression, the man soon appears disappointed. Excited, she confirms that her father has used this ability, so she can use it too, and Swallow just accepts it. She adds that her father's castle was partially destroyed, so she had no choice. He apologizes for the destruction he caused while she reassures him. The girl explains she was already used to it and couldn't avoid it because the human capital was in front of her castle. Ending the conversation, she says they should start gathering information and Swallow agrees. During the walk with the girl, Swallow feels a bad feeling as if something bad is going to happen. After a while, we see a bartender deliver 2 beers to the table where the two were sitting. Looking at the drink, Swallow realizes his intuition didn't fail and he doesn't understand why that was necessary. Mel's then grabs her mug, takes a sip of the drink, and Swallow, confused, asks the girl why they were wasting time there. When the demon finishes swallowing the drink, she begins to explain. She mentions that Swallow probably doesn't know much about the human world because bars are the places with the biggest sources of information. Extending her hand upward, she asks him to look around and see all the conversations happening. It's possible to see that the place is completely crowded and various people drink while conversing. She continues, claiming that all these conversations are raw information gems. While resting her chin on her hands, she smiles at the man, saying that all he needs to do is choose which one to listen to. Confused, he looks to the side and asks her what she meant by that. Soon the guy sees a board with various informative papers hanging. They get up and walk over there. The girl says she didn't know they had one of those there. She explains that it's the information network she had mentioned before. Swallow says he doesn't remember her talking about it. He then grabs a paper from the board and starts reading. Mel's explains that it's an expedition list for the dungeons and serves to prevent more than one group from entering one. She adds that there can never be two distinct groups of humans at the same time in a dungeon, and if that happened, there would be payment distribution problems. With a sad expression, she says that if humans invaded dungeons in larger groups, they would have a much better chance of winning. But they don't do that because they are completely blinded by greed. Upon hearing that, Swallow says it's better for them. Intrigued, the woman asks why he said us and what the purpose of saying that was, asking if he is also a dungeon demon. As she leans her face towards his, she mentions it's strange for a dungeon demon to be able to walk so freely. Trying to get away, Swallow says he's too lazy to try to explain and asks her to forget about it. Even though she says he has many secrets, she claims she will set that aside and that he must have reasons to hide everything. Relieved, the man continues to analyze the rest of the papers on the board when he is surprised to see one. He realizes that one of the papers refers to the ancient core, but notices that the attack list is empty. Thus, he concludes that there is no attack group to invade his dungeon, and therefore he would probably have more time. Curious, Mel's asks which paper the man was looking at. Getting no response, she insists on seeing what he had. Finally, Swallow shows the paper to the girl, who soon smiles upon seeing what it is. She reads and confirms that the paper is about the ancient core, one of the 7 evil dungeons. The man then interrogates if the demon knew about the ancient core, and she immediately affirms she does. As she tears the paper from the board, she extols the grandeur of the dungeon, saying it's the most powerful among all 7. With her eyes shining, she claims any demon would want to be part of it. Continuing, she explains that the ruler of this dungeon is the Lord of all creation, the guardian of God, and it's also the pinnacle of all monsters. Cheerfully, she recites the name Lord Swallow slowly. As he remembers Patrick and Renee arguing with him, he wonders if it was really all that. The demon also says that of all the cores, the ancient core is her favorite dungeon. She reveals that she wants to become stronger to meet Lord Swallow in the future. Sweating, the man realizes that she's saying all this and has no idea she's in front of the Lord she desires so much. The woman affirms that she wants to be like that in the future. She adds that her father was also a strong man and a true demon king fit for the throne, unlike her. With a sad expression, she recounts that what happened is that there was just a human stronger than him. According to her, it was a young hero named Vern. Swallow says that if this is a hero who even defeated the demon king, he doesn't want to get close to him. He doesn't even realize that he defeated this so-called hero with just a yawn. The girl says she doesn't intend to spend her life managing a dungeon like her father did. She wants to allow all her demons to make their own dungeons, and that's why she's going to get strong and ask the guy what he thinks about it. Smiling and imagining that it's good to be young, Swallow nods. The man recalls that he used to be like that so long ago that he can't even remember. At that time, when he was still full of vigor, he led powerful armies, powerful enough to conquer the world, and he tried to dominate all the knowledge of the world, striving more than any other monster, claiming that he even associated with humans and that for a while he dedicated everything to them. However, in the end, he realized that everything he had done had been in vain, and now his only wish is to sleep all day. Finishing his reasoning with a determined expression, he notices that the woman was lying on the table. Upon noticing, he realizes the girl was sleeping. Still in the place, we see a man saying that he forgot to put a request for dungeon subjugation on the board. At the same time, Swallow takes the unconscious Mel's to one of the bar's rooms. And during this, a man complains to the guy for only putting the paper up now. We then see that this paper refers to the ancient core, and that 31 soldiers under the command of the expedition leader Nifrim would invade the dungeon within 72 hours. The day begins, and we see Mel's lying in bed in a room. The girl starts to get up, grumbling about a strong headache. Swallow enters the room and asks if the girl had already woken up. She reports not remembering what happened last night. And when Swallow was about to comment something, he looks at the girl and freezes. Astonished, he falls backward while maintaining a surprised expression. Mel's asks why he's acting that way. Still confused, the man thinks he must be dreaming and remains perplexed. The reason for Swallow's surprise is then revealed. We see the former demon woman in a completely childish form. Swallow asks why she turned into a child. Irritated, she stands up, affirming she's not a child. The man asks if she then became younger. Irritated, the girl starts punching the man while calling him rude. He continues, saying it's entirely her fault for suddenly becoming young amidst a rain of punches to his face. During her attacks, she claims she didn't get younger. She explains that the appearance from last night was her second form, which she uses not to be underestimated by humans. This current appearance is the first form. Then he asks if her current version is her original form, and the demon affirms it is. Swallow's face swells from the blows, and Mel's soon asks how his face became like that. Regardless, she says the magic she used to get the second form only mirrors what her future appearance will be like. In other words, when she grows up, she'll be like her other form. Eden just agrees. Pointing at him, the girl asks if he really understood, and he answers yes, still keeping irritated for no apparent reason. The man comments they'll need new clothes because the old ones are too big for the girl. Insisting, she asks him to stop treating her like a child. The scene jumps to the Count's house in the city of Harston. It's possible to see the entrance of the mansion, which has a tall gate. A cavalry arrives and stands in front of the residence. A messenger dismounts and orders the Count to open the gates to receive the attack team. He continues and informs that they came from Liège to invade and dominate the ancient core. Next to the messenger is the expedition leader Nifrim, mounted on his horse and wearing a white and imposing overcoat. Inside the residence, the Count wonders who was responsible for sending these documents. The maid then responds that it was sent by the Third Eye. Then we see Count Atark, a man dressed finely with long blonde hair. With an irritated expression and veins popping, the Count in his thoughts mentions that the Third Eye is a damned association controlled by the imperial law. He emphasizes that for dungeons with a rank higher than B, you need permission from the territory owner before you can subjugate it. He asserts that they didn't send a request, but a warning, but as it's an imperial order, he doesn't have the right to refuse it. The Count asks the maid if she thinks this attack group is strong enough to subjugate the ancient core. Even hesitating, the woman shakes her head, signaling no. He agrees and also thinks it's too weak a group for such a powerful dungeon. As for the group leader named Nifrim, he's never even heard of him. Still irritated, he wonders what the damn Third Eye wants. According to him, if the group touches the dungeon wrongly, it would put all of Harston's territory at risk. A question arises and he asks if he should ask a stronger group to go to the dungeon. However, to do this, it would have to be a trusted group. The servant then says he can find the answer closer than he thinks. Understanding what the woman meant, he realizes that if he called the magic tower, it would be completely possible. The Count recounts that he heard rumors that the magic tower expanded greatly due to high-quality mana stones of unknown origin. Still, even with accelerated growth, a rank of towers subjugating one of the 7 evil dungeons is unlikely. However, he mentions that if everything he heard is true, there's a possibility it could work. With a smile, he recalls that the Guardian of the Right Path was defeated, so only the dungeon boss who defeated the hero Vern and his subordinates remains. Atark concludes his thought and orders his servant to send someone to the magic tower with an immediate request. He promises fame and money if they manage to subjugate the ancient core anyway. The door of the room they were in is violently opened. An imposing voice speaks that no one but them will enter the dungeon. The Count is confused, wondering who it could be. Soon we see Nifrim, a young man with blonde hair accompanied by 2 more figures. One of these figures is gigantic and carries a huge weapon, while the other seems to be a lovely girl with green hair. Upon entering the room, Nifrim asks if that would be Count Atark. The Count immediately retorts, asking who those people were. Nifrim introduces himself and says that since they didn't open the gate, they had to invade. The Count asks why they had come there without prior notice. The young man sits on the sofa in the room and asks if the Count had received the documents. Then he looks at the Count with a threatening face, questioning if there's any reason they can't go there. Nervous, the Count replies that there isn't while noticing the boy's thirst for blood even though he's so young. The girl affirms they are visitors and asks for something to eat. The Count orders the servant to go and do what the girl asked for. After the food arrives, the Count is sitting in front of Nifrim while the girl starts eating next to him. Atark soon asks why they were after him. Confidently, Nifrim says it's obvious they are there to conquer the ancient core. The Count reports that it's only been 1 day since the official documents arrived at his place, and they arrived very quickly. He continues and asks if they already know when they will attack. Nifrim assumes they would go today, but an unforeseen event occurred, so they'll probably go tomorrow. Impressed, the Count says that's very fast and affirms that if they need accommodation, he will offer full support. Nifrim, putting his feet on a small table in front of him, says it won't be necessary. He then informs that they will only visit the magic tower and then leave. Startled, Atark asks why they are going to the magic tower. The young boy says it's nothing special. Then, with an extremely disturbing and frightening smile, he states they are going to kill everyone there. Shocked, the Count asks what he's talking about. Nifrim reveals that he overheard everything and knows that the Count intended to lead the subjugation of the dungeon to the magic tower. While looking coldly at the Count, he asserts that they are also there to dominate the dungeon, and he won't hesitate to get rid of anyone who tries to bother him. Nifrim then comments that only the strongest group will be able to defeat the dungeon. The Count immediately apologizes and says he won't request another group and asks them to start the attack whenever they want. While biting a cookie, Nifrim sarcastically thanks the Count for his generosity. Elsewhere, we see Patrick training with his new sword while saying that the invaders are coming. At this moment, Swallow and Mel's are walking through the Imperial capital. Soon Mel spots guards and warns the guy they are in that direction. Swallow informs the guard that he wished to go to the teleportation hub. Surprisingly, the guard replies that he still had a long way to go. Confused, the man asks the guard where the hub is located. The guard explains that where they are is only the entrance and that the hub is located outside the Imperial Palace. He adds that they will still have to pass through 3 more castle walls. The monster then asks how long it would take for him to reach his destination. After calculating, the guard informs that if he goes on foot, it should take around a week. Astonished by the information, Swallow doesn't believe what he heard. He knows that if it takes so long, Patrick will probably have escaped from the dungeon. Mel's then whispers, suggesting they use flying magic. Swallow doesn't accept the idea and explains that if they release too much mana, they will be discovered by humans. In the background, an elderly man appears and calls out to the 2 people. The old man apologizes for interfering and asks if they were trying to go to the hub. Mel's suspicious, confirms it, but she wanted to know who the old man was. He introduces himself as the flying carriage driver Belver. Confused for not knowing what that means, she asks what it is. He points to a carriage being pulled by an angelic-looking monster. He tells the being is an abandoned 4th-generation homunculus. He comments that the beast is the result of the artificial angel manufacturing plan carried out by the Empire. Swallow says he understood, and the young girl looks disgustedly at the creature. Soon the old man adds that the creature is strong and can fly, but it was abandoned for failing to bring about the collapse of the church, which was its original purpose. The little girl asks if the homunculus experiments are over, and the old man responds absolutely not. The elderly man strokes the creature and asserts that the Empire would never give up on that kind of power. He also emphasizes that there are rumors of some place that produces homunculi on a large scale. Confused, Swallow asks if they are no longer incubated in giant jars. The old man denies it, saying that this method is outdated, belonging to the 1st generation of homunculi that happened over 150 years ago. He then reflects and realizes that it has been 150 years since Renee's birth. The girl examines the carriage, noting that it is of high quality, and asks how long the trip will take. The old man explains that the journey takes 3 hours and an hour for the inspection carried out by the castle. Swallow asks what the cost would be, and the man replies that it would cost 8 gold coins to take both of them. Our protagonist is amazed to see that this was equivalent to 800 silver coins and mentions that a night in a tavern cost only 8 silver coins. The girl reports having no money at all, and Swallow also says he doesn't have any while rummaging through his pockets. During his search, he finds a good amount of gold coins in his pockets that were left by Patrick. The 2 get into the carriage and take off. During the journey, Mel's asks who gave so much money to Swallow. He lies down and yawns, replying that it was a member of the dungeon who secretly gave it to him. Confused, she asks how he could walk around so freely being a dungeon monster. He replies that he was expelled. The girl asks if the person he's looking for is also an expelled member of the dungeon. He answers yes. During the journey, the girl looks at the view and emphasizes that even after being expelled, he still cares about a member of the dungeon. With a tearful expression, she affirms wanting friends like that. Then she wishes to have a life like Swallow's where you have people to take care of you and you take care of them. Sleepy, he simply agrees with the girl's statement. After the trip, they finally arrive at Gold Street and look for the location of the hub. We see Swallow questioning if they really couldn't use the teleport hub. The hub attendant confirms this, apologizing immediately for the situation. Sad, the girl apologizes because she couldn't know that would happen. Seeing her urgency, the local guard explains that they can return at 8 p.m. and that the hub was closed because of the auction that will take place. Then he hands Swallow a paper and states that at the end of the auction, the hub will be reopened. Our protagonist asks if they were going to close the hub just because of an auction. In an attempt to calm him down, the man explains that yes, because an extremely rare item appeared. This item is the decapitated tooth that has been missing for several years and was put on display a few days ago. Then Swallow looks at the paper and remembers having seen that weapon before. As he realizes this, his voice trembles and he states that the weapon belongs to his friend. The officer asks if he was mistaken, while he denies it. He then describes the weapon that can change shape. Confused, the guard says he must be mistaken because there is only one weapon like that. Putting his hand on his face, he realizes that if there is only one and that was Renee's weapon, his body begins to be overcome by his anger, imagining that Renee may have been defeated by humans. His face starts to distort and be taken over by darkness. He mentions that even the 7 chiefs of the evil dungeons would have difficulty dealing with Renee, asserting that his companion is strong and that her title of Lady of the Blade is not for nothing. He then wonders if Renee was with her weapon when she left. If Renee was carrying a blade when she left, it truly is a misery. Her clothes had nowhere to store them, and yet she still threw one in his direction. She never had less than 5 blades when fighting, and she isn't like Patrick, who becomes even stronger with just 1 blade. Because if she's without her blades, there's not much she can do. The girl is worried about Swallow's condition as she thinks about this. He simply cannot accept that mere humans could have done this to her. If Renee is truly no longer alive, and if this was done by a useless human, the right thing would be to undo the lives of all the humans who were there, the fool in front of her is already desperate. It doesn't take long for him to go into shock and fall to the ground unconscious. Things are getting more and more grim, and the girl tries hard to calm Swald down. She even pulls him by the sleeve of his clothes to see if she can get his attention. She wants him to at least answer her and say why he's so out of control. Looking at her, he asks about the decapitating blade, which is one of the 36 virtuous works of art, if there was truly only one in the whole world. From what she knows, there shouldn't be more than one. She wants to know why the sudden curiosity, and he says it belonged to a friend, and he would like to find this blade. Now that he has the information he wanted, he says he no longer needs her help. Since he already knew the way to Harston, he could calmly follow his path. Now it would be better for her to leave as soon as possible. Even hearing this, she insists on staying, because she wants to know if the friend he is referring to is the demon who takes the form of a silver-haired woman, a warrior who holds one of the 36 virtuous blades. He looks at her upon hearing those words. He says it's Renee, the Maiden of Blades. From his reaction, the girl imagines she hit the mark, and Swald asks her to stop with the provocations. Then he asks how much she would like to know about this matter. But she says he doesn't need to tell her everything, even using his scary voice to intimidate her. After all, she already knew what he was like. She knows that Renee is a guardian of the great center of the elders, one of the highest among the highest. And if he says she is his friend, then he could only be the master of the center of the elders, the great Lord Swallow. That statement surprised him a lot. Faced with that, he confirms his identity. But she didn't get to hear the answer, as she said that he must be a subordinate of the great Lord Swallow. He sighs at that statement, but inside he cringes because she assumes something so unobvious and inappropriate. She still boasts, thinking that from his look she must have been quite accurate and insightful in her conclusion. Besides that, there's something else she wants to say, because she knows the kind of thoughts that go through his head, and she intends to help him, whether he wants it or not. But to him, if she claims to be close to the level of the Demon King, it doesn't seem like she can do that just by arguing. She says it's not the most logical who becomes king, it's the king who dictates logic. That conversation was heading in strange directions, and his face couldn't hide it. She says that's not the expression of the Swald she knows, because not long ago he was all scary with things coming out of his back. Even so, she's happy that he's back to normal, and that she's really going to help him from now on, and that he shouldn't use that voice to say those things again, and she wants him to promise. Finally, the day of the auction has arrived. At the back entrance, a guard is lazily working. While thinking that he didn't even need to be there, someone calls him. Two people want to participate in the auction and ask if they could enter through there. He's startled and says yes, but that you would need to see their identification first. She introduces herself as Mels, from the House of Agria, and that is her servant, Swald. The guard asks her to wait a moment while he looks for her name on the list. He said she wasn't on the list for that day, and Mels says that's very strange. Then she asked if Swald had any invitation with him. The man said he did, and he approached the guard, who says nervously that invitations weren't sent out. The poor guard received a slap to the face that must have hurt a bit. Swald says that was his invitation to the afterlife. He said the girl could wear different clothes, and she says he must be afraid of being seduced by her beauty. But he says she is a child and should dress like one, and soon they begin to argue about it, as Mel says she is not. At Chait Castle, the grim red sky stretches as far as the eye can see. Lying in bed, the woman says that Renee would no longer be able to return to the center of the elders. 80 years ago, a great fire overtook the Grappenia forest. She apologizes to her grandmother, as she never imagined humans were capable of such things. However, she believed that the forest would soon jump with joy and be restored. After all, she had done them a favor. That is the spirit of the Grappenia forest. The center of the elders has been using the forest as a natural fortress, so it needed to leave a good impression. If all the humans who started the fire were no longer alive, Grappenia's anger would surely subside little by little. Even so, she wonders what she should do now, because in this case, it seems to have no connection at all. The more he looks at it, the more intrigued he becomes by the homunculus, a non-human creature that is human. He doesn't know if he should give her a wooden suit, because a good witness is a witness that doesn't breathe. His master's last words were that he was free now and could do whatever he wanted. He told her that despite saying this, he wouldn't help her leave there. She could choose whether she would die trapped there or outside. That choice was now to Lelo. His master was looking for a woman with that name, and since she was the only one there, it was likely that the name belonged to her. And his mercy, motivated by curiosity, ended there. The girl mutters a few things. She tries to speak a little more, but it's inaudible. Lelo, that name is given to the most talented girl in domestic service. The Lelo of that place was a middle-aged woman. That homunculus had never been called by that name before because objects don't have names. Even so, because of that, she ended up adopting that name. The girl looked at the light while saying the name Lelo. At Chait Castle, a young woman is outside. Someone calls her Renee. The messenger says that the Empire's subjugation team was heading to the center of the elders. And even though Bathory had said that Renee refuses to return to the center of the elders, she said she didn't come there to make her go back, as she values her happiness, but also values freedom and the possibility of choice. Moreover, Renee should resolve her problems. If it's those two, they'll look for her everywhere. And if they find out she was deceived by a human, Swallow and Patrick could commit atrocities. So if she plans to live in the shadows, she should erase all her traces forever. It doesn't have to be perfect, as Patrick would understand the message, and because of the subjugation team, the center of the elders will be occupied. Now, if she truly planned to tie up loose ends, it should be now. She calls the other woman by name as she stands up. She said she's going to a distant place to breathe purer air than that there. She noticed that Renee's right eye was getting cloudy and wants to know if it's okay for her to go alone. But Renee said she's fine and thanks her for her concern, and she'd like to know where her blade is. Swald is now interrogating a human about the whereabouts of the blade he came to retrieve. The man knows little, saying that it was the magic tower of Harson that brought it. Hearing those words, Swald wants to confirm if it was Asa from the magic tower who brought the blade. Releasing him, he thanked him for the truth and said he would let him live. And he left the place calmly, as if nothing had happened. The man recovers, but thinks he did nothing wrong and that he's just a guard and nothing more, and hopes Swald goes to hell. Swald suddenly appears behind him and says yes, he did nothing wrong. But even though he did nothing wrong, he unfortunately caught his attention. He asked him what humans say when they enter their territory, but the man can only call him a monster. Humans don't call it genocide, they call it a crusade, subjugation, or attack. He wants to know if he's ever felt sorry for killing a monster, if they did anything wrong against him to justify it. He knows the answer and says it's the same for him. The human is his enemy, and that's why he's going to do this. Meanwhile, at the auction, an item is reaching exorbitant values. It has reached 70 billion. A woman says she's bored and would like to participate, but her colleague says they're just there for security. She says she can't play with Gerard around. She's Woon Historia, an executive of the Black Tigers, and Gerard says they mustn't forget their purpose there. They should finish the job soon and find something tasty to eat. The auctioneer is almost done selling that item when black shadows appear behind him. A big squirt of tomato sauce flies through the air, making the crowd scream hysterically. Swald says that he will finish the auction now and that all those people were there for only one reason. The Black Tiger executives recognize that ominous figure. He says that everyone there only wants to obtain the decapitating blade and nothing more. There are 3 warriors in the Empire, and one of them lies at the center of the Elders, Burn. This sparked a rumor, saying it only happened because he invaded a dungeon for personal reasons, and the criticism fell on those who survived. One of them knew that he needed to inspire the people of the Empire with confidence, enough to ignite their fighting spirit and suppress survival instincts. His legs weakened at the sight of that scene, and Historia had to be restrained in the face of it. Her colleague says that she can't just charge ahead. More than that, she simply couldn't do it at all. That thing before them is dangerous beyond what words can describe. Swald walks calmly across the stage, knowing he is intimidating and powerful. He is observing the auction item in front of him. That piece before him is indeed the real one. He could feel Renee's energy emanating from it. That's not something a copy would do. As he suspected, Renee must have truly been captured by the humans, even though the situation is difficult to describe to those still there. That item already has an owner, and he will return it. It would be a shame for it to be sold at such a high price. Before he could finish speaking, a man asked the guards to deal with the intruder. It seems they don't want him to leave there calmly, and the feeling is mutual. He can't wait to play with them like Lego and scatter pieces all over the floor. He will make sure to use that blade to make them wooden coats. Leaping from the crowd, someone says they won't let him do that. He looks at this pathetic figure approaching. Historia charges at him, ready to attack with all her might. Good moves, good equipment, but to him she's just a flying squirrel, nothing more. He dodges, thinking she has no talent for this. And besides the gauntlets, she has no other weapon. From a distance, she prepares to strike again. Swald decides he will take her hand and crush those gauntlets until nothing is left. As he observes the attack, he concludes that for a human it's actually impressive. He managed to hold her fist without any difficulty. But the result wasn't what he expected, and something surprised him. That little girl's blow managed to hurl him through the walls as if he were a soccer ball. She catches her breath after doing that. Swald says she is not an ordinary girl. Now Vistoria is impressed that even after that, he's still alive. That technique finishes dungeon bosses as if they were ordinary monsters. And even one who boasted of resisting its attacks was finished after a single blow. The gauntlet used in the attack falls to the ground, as it is now useless. There is a gas behind him like fluid. He is definitely not human and also not a common monster. Now she wants to know what he could be, as he's still alive. Laughing sadistically, Swald says that's very unfortunate. His shadow expands, taking over much of the place. Historia's friend shouts for her, calling her attention. Geralt was approaching the spot where the fight was taking place, but she warns Geralt not to come any closer, as it's dangerous. However, preparing her attack, she asks Historia to get out of the way. Things are over and the place is completely destroyed. Mel's asks if Swald is okay, and he says yes. She thought he had met a meaningless death, but he says he's still alive. The first attack is not something a human could do, and if it had hit his heart, it could have scared him so much that he'd change form as a reflex. And if that happened, he can't even imagine what Patrick would do. He'd certainly have preferred to die. However, there's something more important than that. He missed all of them, completely missed. There were 2 troublesome flying squirrels. The one with colored hair managed to evacuate everyone during his distraction, as well as create a magical barrier around the one with the gauntlets. This made him find their ability to handle the situation interesting. There's the sound of things falling and someone thinks it might be an earthquake. People say something is happening in that direction, and one of them helps someone who was unconscious. She was severely injured and called for a healer or someone who could help her, as a single strike had left her in that state despite being a warrior. As she gets up, she's wondering if everyone is safe, and her concern is focused on her friend. But Garrett says he's there and that he can't hear her if she speaks so softly. Her friend is there in front of her, safe and unharmed. Historia is quite happy, knowing her friend is alive. But she says not to thank her just yet, because if it weren't for her, Historia would be wearing a wooden coat by now. It doesn't take long for her to realize it wasn't that simple. Garrett now had one less arm on his body, but he downplays the damage, saying it's not life-threatening. She gets emotional thinking that if it weren't for her haste, her friend wouldn't have been hurt so badly. Garrett immediately reprimands her, telling her not to cry. She is a hero of the Empire and shouldn't be doing that. Speaking more softly, he says it's just an arm and asks if she knows who they were facing. That monster is the heart of the Elder Devourer, but she thinks it's a joke that a monster like that would never come to a place like this. She doesn't know why either, but she's sure of it. That was the Black Calamity, the Elder Devourer. It still had traces of the hero burn. With less than a month, the situation was worse than they imagined. If things continue this way, the fall of the Empire is a real possibility. For her, if it's really him, they need to try even harder to confront him because this is human territory and they have the advantage. But Garrett says that is beyond their scope. That power is simply immense. There's no chance of victory now. They need to inform the chief of the Demon Subjugation Coalition and report everything to the Imperial family. In her condition, she won't be able to teleport both of them, so she asked Historia to stay there. She partially healed her, then asked her not to stray too far to wait there. However, she doesn't know if the monster will attack again, but Garrett asks her to wait anyway. Teleporting, she asked once again for her to listen. Garrett disappeared in front of a worried Historia. Meanwhile, Swall doesn't know if he should chase those who fled or return to Harston right away, but if he follows the humans, he will eliminate risk variables. Now he is deep in thought, unsure of what to do. Since he already has what he wanted, he thinks of going back as he has an objective he must not forget. He needs to recover at least Renee's body, and he asked Mel's to get ready soon. She agrees, but something seems wrong with her. Even so, she says it's nothing. However, he asks her again if something happened, because looking at her, it's clear she's not okay. She says she already knew he was strong, but the more she sees his deeds, the more impressed she is with what he's capable of. She thinks he might be stronger than she thought Renee was, or perhaps she was wrong about Renee and him as well. Now she would like him to tell her who he really is. Swald scratches his head, thinking about what to answer this child, and gives her a gentle knock on the head. The matter was trivial, and she shouldn't worry about something like that, much less feel sad about it. He is just Sir Swald, nothing more than that. Once they settle everything, we'll tell her the whole truth. And he comforted her after saying that. Now it was time to settle things and show them the power of a demon king. Mel's removes the coat that was covering her body, revealing immense wings as she says Swald is right about what they need to do. She uses her reconstruction magic, creating a huge violet dome. Inside, a great explosion occurs. People are frightened because they have no idea what just happened. Historia knows that the auction house they were in is in that direction. Doing that in the middle of the capital is truly something that shouldn't happen, as there are many people in the capital who might perish. She doesn't know what to do amid all that destruction. She is remembering Garrett's words to do nothing. Now she bites her lips, angry and feeling completely powerless. But before she could do anything, someone grabs her by the hand. It's a child asking for her help because their father is far away. Seeing the little one, she tightens her grip on the gauntlet that remained intact. She shouted for people to calm down because she would take care of the situation. After handing the child over to their father, she begins to march forward. She is a warrior above all, and she cannot simply flee from a monster just because it's stronger than her. The city was completely devastated. A foot kicks the rubble, its Swald emerging from it. As soon as he fully emerges, he calls Mel's attention. He couldn't believe the name of that magic, but she explained that reconstruction makes the entire ground collapse. Pointing to their surroundings, she said everything is cleaner now, but he wished she had used something else. He said he had struck a cool pose, ready to finish things, and then she used her strongest magic. If she had known he would complain, she would have done something different. Swald thought she could have judged the situation better. As they talk, he senses something. Things were getting more complicated now. He asked Mel's if she remembered the way to the hub, and she said she remembered it very well. He told her to go quickly, because the humans would be gathering on the way. Now he would handle some things and would soon head to Harston, much to her surprise, as she wanted to know what he would do. Besides, he kept mentioning that place, but she didn't know where it was. He then asked if she knew where the center of the elders was, and she said yes. As she mentioned that it was her favorite dungeon, he told her that Harston is the nearest city from there. But with her head down, she admitted she only knew the place through books, and Swald told her to continue on her way quickly. She left saying she would protect the hub, and Swald said he would follow her soon. Now he was alone amidst the city's destruction. They were already there anyway, and he wonders how many people there would be this time. Those were soldiers from Langware, one of the 9 houses of the Empire, the Blue Subjugation Team. Their leader addresses Squald, asking who he is. But all Squald can think is that asking such questions is a waste of time, and he doesn't understand why humans are like this. He was worried because he heard people outside the auction house, but it seemed they were just someone's soldiers. Finally, he responds, asking the man if he really wants to know who he is or if he should really tell him. His response is as simple as possible. He says he is their enemy. Then his form begins to change, more of that dark energy surrounding him. At the center of the elders, someone tells Nifrim that those who enter that cave don't leave alive and their souls are corrupted, wandering aimlessly through the world. Sylvia was terrified and couldn't wait to leave, but the young man told her to stop with that talk. But she says she was just trying to make some jokes, nothing more. However, something felt a bit strange. The first hall they entered was full of monster corpses, but the one they were in now was completely clean, as if someone had completely cleared it. So she started asking the other soldiers' opinions. They couldn't believe Hishtalz had cleaned the place, nor that a monster could have done all that. It didn't make sense for a monster to collect the bodies of its kind in the dungeon. Nifrim's eyes noticed something. He shouted for the monster to stop playing games with them and to stop trying to deceive them. In response, the voice said they were speaking too loudly, echoing even through its ribs, and that it had only cleaned because the scene was unpleasant. Nifrim ordered Sylvia to quickly provide light. A spell appeared in her hands, emitting light into the space. Patrick said that it was too bright and that they had worked hard to get there, even though they weren't invited, and he welcomed them. That skeleton. Nifrim knew it was the Death Knight Patrick. Patrick hadn't expected to be recognized and had prepared an entire introduction that was now useless, leaving him upset with them. He said all their reactions were bad and that they should lower their weapons and calm down a bit. He wondered if he had said something wrong, but an attack was already heading for his head. It was Mifrim, who said he would stop him from spouting nonsense immediately. Patrick remarked that they had no manners and didn't even give him time to catch his breath. Now he was being attacked with a huge ice spell. A massive explosion occurred as the attack collided with its target. He feels this often, and 1 against all is too much for him right now. Although he always ends up winning, of course, now he's dodging all the attacks aimed at him. Nifrim is determined to strike him with his dagger. Patrick realizes that the attacks will continue if he just keeps dodging. So he decides to summon his sword, which appears with a beam of light. Unfortunately, that was quite unexpected, and for a human, this person was actually quite strong. Before him, the human began to summon several spells to aid him in fighting with more strength and agility. Patrick then recognized that the source of his power was magic, and while that was unreasonable, he knew the effect wouldn't last long. He only needed to endure for a minute, just 1 minute and nothing more. But the human continued to cast continuous magic, and now things were getting a bit more serious. He was already behind Patrick, who hadn't noticed his approach. The human asked him to repeat who was going to win this. Patrick complimented him as he hadn't thought magic would be used to corner him. Sylvia thought that was far too easy, and that the guardian of the center of the elders was a weaker monster than expected. But he said, as expected, he should have taken care of the green-haired mage first. The human standing over him told him to shut up as he pressed him down with his feet. He was ready to strike him fatally, but his blade was stopped by the skeleton's fingers, which held it as if it were nothing. Patrick began to laugh uncontrollably, saying that this time he had really gotten immersed in his performance. He apologized, saying he hadn't meant to do that, but he had been bored these last few years and wanted to know what a real crisis felt like just once in his life. And he thanked all of them for participating in that. The human screamed in fury at everything that was happening. Patrick stood up, not entirely sure what had just happened. Finally, Patrick said he had woken up. It only took him a few seconds to resolve everything once his breaker flipped, but it would be better if he took a look for himself. None of the humans who met Patrick, the Death Knight, had left alive so far. He thought the human knew this, given that he recognized Patrick's name, but it seemed he only knew the name and nothing more. However, the green-haired mage was a bit more difficult, and he flung her in his direction. Using divine magic makes his bones itch just thinking about it. He asked if he was really Nifrim, because the mage hadn't stopped saying that name until everything was over. She had screamed it over and over again. He said she wouldn't stop shouting desperately, and Nifrim listened to the narrative in silence. Patrick expected a more enraged reaction, but Nifrim was colder than he had anticipated. Now it was time for questions. Even though Fimor was a fool, he wouldn't have sent only 30 people, and Patrick apologized for saying it, but they were quite weak. So it was time for him to reveal what they were hiding. And because Patrick was generous, he gave 2 options. If he wanted to answer, he should raise his right hand, if not the left. Seeing the right hand raised, he said it was a wise choice, and he'd ensure a quick and painless death. Seeing the middle finger raised instead, Patrick hadn't expected such defiance. So he would respect his decision, hoping that his death wouldn't be quick. Walking around, Patrick wondered when he'd have to clean all that up again. But it would definitely be easier than the last time. Nifrim was still alive and wanted to make sure the skeleton was no longer there. He looked down slowly. In his lap was the body of the green-haired mage. He gazed at her carefully while still injured. He stroked her face as he apologized. His mouth began to change suddenly, and he was apologizing because he needed to survive. Patrick said those sounds were unpleasant, and he knew something had been hidden there. Consuming bodies makes her stronger and heals her wounds, but he didn't know if it was cumulative or limited to human bodies. Since there were plenty of bodies around, he'd take all the time he needed to test the possibilities. Either way, he wanted to know where his boss was and what he was doing now. He just hoped he wasn't doing anything weird in an even stranger place. Swald was in the midst of battle. Bodies burned all around, and he asked if the girl was also there to meet the same fate as the others. Prepared for battle, she said no. She was Historia, a hero of the Empire. Swald said he never cared to know her name, admired her spirit, but she would never defeat him here. Historia readied herself to attack, knowing he might be right about that. Then, for a moment, he was surprised by what he saw. She struck him once more, knowing she had to stop him. After the blow, she realized it had been caught by a bare hand. Swald says she would only hit him once, no more than that. He commanded her to flee if she was even capable of doing so now. It didn't take long before she felt her whole body move. He had thrown her to the ground as if she were nothing, and it was becoming increasingly clear that she couldn't do anything. The blows were strong enough to make her agonize, and all she hoped was that she had bought some time. She is a hero, and her duty as one is to protect the people. Swald lifted her with one hand, wondering aloud if it was over. While still being held, she repeated once again that she is Wu Historia and a hero. Because of that, she couldn't perish like this. She couldn't allow that monster to do whatever he wanted, much less attack the people of her land, and then a blue energy began to surge around her. She screamed as she prepared to strike him with one of her hands. Her hand struck him, but it did nothing. He didn't even move. Slowly, her fingers began to falter, weakened. He finally let her go, congratulating her for not having died in vain. He said he would remember her name, though he didn't know for how long. And in respect for her perseverance, there was only one thing he could do: ensure her a quick and painless death. But before he could do anything, something struck him. He turned around to see who the brave soul was who had dared to attack him. He asked if they were sausages, since they always come one after another tied together. They said they had taken drastic measures to save Wooin and apologized for being rude, but Swald retorted that one doesn't apologize for attacking from behind. Greetings, though they are belated, said the young man. He is Arl the Black Tigers, and he is honored to meet the almighty Lord Swallow. Now, Swald wanted to know how he had been identified as Lord Swallow. The young man said he had a talented subordinate who was able to recognize him. His smile concealed something, and Swald said he was in no mood now. He added that they were wasting time if their intention was to attack him after so much talking. But they didn't intend to attack. On the contrary, they had come to offer a deal. Swald merely laughed at those words. It did make sense to make a deal with him. He had no regrets, and they should choose their words wisely, as their suffering would depend on them. The young man knew it was a gamble, one that involved the Empire's safety. He then said that the one who wielded the decapitating blade was still alive. He imagined that Swald hadn't come just to retrieve that item. There must be more to it, and he wanted to help with whatever Swald desired. Swald wanted to know what they would do if he said he didn't need their help with anything, and he started walking toward them. Maybe he had come just because he had nothing better to do and decided to butcher some people to pass the time. Very close to them, he asked what they would do if that were his answer. But if he were going to destroy everything anyway, they should at least try. Swald realized that what they wanted to avoid was destruction. If that's what they wanted, they needed to find the blade's wielder immediately. The young man replied that they would do as he commanded and called for Garrot. He said they must have met before. To find someone, she needed access to an object that carried traces of that person, and she asked if it was alright to examine the blade. Swald warned that if she did something foolish, she would lose much more than just an arm. She said she was already aware of the consequences. Touching the item, she felt that someone had left a significant trace. The person was far away but moving westward, and Swald knew that was toward Harston. He said that was enough. Remembering Renee, he felt grateful that she was still alive. He sighed in relief, much to the surprise of those around him. He said he was indebted to them and he would remember both of them. The young man said it was an honor to help. Swald continued on his way, telling them to get out of his path. Elsewhere, Mel's greeted Swald's arrival. With enemies scattered across the ground, she said he had taken longer than expected. He stood there before her, looking at the pile of bodies. She was pleased to have fulfilled her part of the agreement protecting the teleport hub or teleportation axis, but she was very weakened and said that with this, she should have repaid her debt to him. He caught her before she could fall to the ground and said yes, the debt was indeed repaid. He thanked her for working so hard. Before the machinery, he tried to understand how it worked. The coordinates were set for Harston, and now he needed to infuse some of his mana into it. But the object began to crack spontaneously. It shattered, and a blue liquid began to pour out in all directions. Swald was disappointed that it hadn't withstood his mana, feeling confident since his polymorph was stable. Perhaps if he used Demura's mana suppressor, he could teleport safely. He would need to undo his polymorph, but that would announce his presence to every living being. However, he had already come too far. Now was not the time to worry about such things. He then removed the bracelet he was wearing. Energy started pouring out from his back, and he apologized to Patrick. The entire place immediately began to tremble. Several black tentacles started to emerge from everywhere. The building he was in was instantly destroyed. Swald had now taken a different form, one that no longer resembled a human. The coordinates were set for Harston, the magic tower, the wing. A large tower stood out in the middle of the city. A young man welcomed the visitors, checking the data of those arriving. In front of him stood Renee, who asked if the human could use transfer magic. But he said no, there was a resistor in the tower that prevented that, so access was only possible after verification. She drew a few blades and said you wouldn't be able to escape then. It didn't take long for the floor to be stained with tomato sauce. The first time she came there, she had thought out a few things. Human magic towers are very similar to dungeons. They're essentially dungeons but made by humans. Renee made her way through the place, as those humans were like very weak monsters. Continuing her path, she knew she had taken care of all the humans on the first floor. Now she was climbing the stairs toward what she had come to find. There was only one thing left, the last floor of that tower. The woman greeted her and said she expected more, but it was just the little girl she had met before. From the looks of it, this girl was not human. Renee asked the woman where the decapitating blade was, but the mage said that it was now her property and it made no sense to say where it was. Still, there was something that piqued her curiosity. That girl standing before her. The mage wanted to know how she was still alive. Renee didn't respond, instead preparing to attack. At this, the mage smiled, saying that Renee wielded a weapon that didn't match her delicate appearance. She underestimated her, claiming she was the master of that tower, and her adversary only had blades in her favor. Using a blade without attributes against her was practically useless. However, the mage soon realized her magical barrier had done nothing. The being before her wasn't a girl, it was a monster, and she couldn't tell how strong it was. Even so, that tower was built on a mana spring. If she used it to her advantage, she could win. Renee pressed on with her attack, demanding to know where the decapitating blade was. She told the mage to hurry and answer her, but the blade was no longer there, having been sent to auction. The mage then invoked a magic that engulfed the area where they stood. She admitted that the girl seemed quite strong, so she would use everything she had from the start and prepared a powerful spell. Then she cast a few more to increase the attack's efficiency, and soon several spears were flying toward Renee. The girl watched the attack closely. From outside, it was clear that one of the tower's walls had shattered from an internal explosion. Things had gone just as the mage predicted. This was the inevitable result of what happens to a monster pretending to be human. It was a powerful magic, something not even dungeon bosses could withstand. There was no way she could have survived. But it didn't take long for the mage to realize something was wrong. Her hands had suddenly exploded. She was in agony, unsure of how that had happened to her hands. Renee calmly said that all she did was make her hands disappear, and that the human shouldn't make such a fuss about it. The mage was in shock and Renee kicked her. The mage tried to crawl away, begging for someone to save her. But soon she collapsed from her injuries. It was over. Every trace of Renee had been erased. The question now was what she would do next. What remained for her to do? She was exhausted and couldn't afford to lose consciousness now. She heard people approaching the place following the mage. A man arrived and went to aid the mage. He told her to hold on and keep fighting, but the mage muttered weakly. The man realized what he needed to do was finish off the one who had caused this misery. Renee looked at the man, a bit intrigued by what he could possibly do. But he continued aiding the mage, telling her to stay calm as she had lost a lot of tomato sauce, and he presented a stone to her. She couldn't quite see it as her vision was blurred. He explained it was a mana stone which she couldn't activate, but with her mana, it would be possible. Renee realized that the essence inside that stone was the same as the one in the stone of love. She couldn't forget that unpleasant sensation. The mage thanked him, believing that thanks to the stone, she would survive. But that wasn't what she expected. Soon, she began to writhe in pain. As she agonized, the man casually mentioned that the mage had many enemies. He had received an order to dispose of her if she started behaving suspiciously. Looking at Renee, who was still standing there, he asked if that wasn't true. He thanked her for doing his job, but given the way things were, he realized she might come after him as well. Now the mage's body began to transform into something horrifying. This was in fact his guarantee that he would have enough time to escape. Renee, unable to see out of one of her eyes and with a tired body and no proper weapon, faced an opponent she couldn't easily defeat. Still, it would have to be enough. Pathetic was all Renee said about the monster before her. She knew she would have to pay the price here, erasing every last trace of herself. But she was furious. The beast had no right to try and cover up Lord Swallow's tracks with those hands. Even if she perished, Renee continued to fight. One of the tentacles struck her violently. All she could think about was whether Lord Swallow would be sad to discover that she had been killed. Outside, the tower shattered once more from the ongoing battle. Now it was Swald who stood outside, having completely destroyed the tower. He immediately asked if Renee was alright. The first time he had saved her was in a similar situation, powerless and unsure of her purpose. In both instances, it was Lord Swallow who saved her. Now she was certain it was Swald who had saved her, and looked at him in disbelief. He reached down and gently helped her to her feet. She still didn't know what he was doing there, but Swald asked her to wait a moment. It was so absurd that Renee wondered if she was hallucinating. But before her stood the monster formed from the mage's body. Swald, with little patience left, was ready to tear that mass of tentacles apart. His appearance began to change as he prepared to attack. The first blow he delivered caused devastating damage. That poor monster didn't know its place. Its agonizing screams echoed throughout the city. It began to be slowly absorbed. Swald watched with disdain as this happened. He lifted what was left of the monster with one hand. Then he began to slam it into the ground. It didn't take long for its body to become completely disfigured. He grabbed it once more. Small tentacles began to form around his hand, but every effort was utterly futile. Swald struck again, disgusted by what had happened. A massive explosion occurred suddenly. Now all that remained on the ground was the monster's blood. His hand was stained with that bluish liquid. Now he understood how it had kept regenerating endlessly. The monster slowly began to regain its form. Its source of power was the mana from the magic tower. Swald stood still as the creature's tentacles approached him. Now that he knew how it worked, things would be even easier. In a different form, he grew so large that he could swallow the city whole. With a single bite, he devoured it entirely. The taste was, without a doubt, one of the worst in his life. He slowly approached Renee. As he drew closer, he called her by name. Faced with her silence, he sat down beside her. There were so many things he wanted to say to her, but the moment he found her, he forgot them all. He should have written them down. He mentioned meeting a green-haired woman along the way, but he had killed her and wondered if that would cause a problem. But Renee remained silent. Being direct, he apologized for what he had done a few days ago. Renee was crying without making a sound. She said that he wasn't the one who should apologize. It was her. She had no right to look at him. Swald said that the center of the elders needed a guardian named Renee, and he needed her too. Renee asked if he held any resentment toward her, and Swald replied that he did not. She also asked if he hated her, but again, he said he didn't. In fact, there was something he wanted to give her. He extended the decapitating blade to her, saying it was an item she had forgotten. Renee hadn't expected to find her blade, let alone have Swald return it to her. Embracing it, she began to cry even more. Now she shared how she was feeling. She had been so afraid of being abandoned and hated by Swald. But he told her that not only did he not hate her, but he would never abandon her. Now it was time for both of them to return to the center of the elders. Meanwhile, the dog said it had found the homunculus in Grappina, and again in the laboratory. It had brought her along as it seemed like destiny. Patrick asked if that body held all the knowledge for the production of homunculi. Furthermore, even in the dungeon's main hall, she hadn't shown any emotion. Due to the energy of the place, she certainly had the mental and physical strength to withstand anything. So Patrick asked what the boss would do with her. Since she seemed to have potential, Swald said he would teach her to fight, and if that didn't work, he would let her live peacefully there. Patrick couldn't believe it and was anxious to know who would be responsible for teaching her. Swald said that the one responsible would be him, Patrick. He told him not to play hard to get, as he knew Patrick complained about being bored with nothing to do. Since she was a homunculus, she was likely very strong and likely harbored hatred for humans. Now Patrick wanted to know if she had a name. He tried to remember, as he thought he had heard it once. She muttered something. To Patrick's surprise, he hadn't expected that. She said slowly Lello without any context. Patrick asked if that was really her name, if there was nothing more. Swald said it didn't matter, but Patrick suggested the boss could give her another name. So he began to think of a name. He suggested naming her Renee. Patrick liked the suggestion, thinking her name could now be Renee Lello, but Swald was already asleep again. Patrick knelt down a bit to speak with her. They would start with the basics, and he taught her how to smile. Patrick hadn't expected her to smile in a situation like that. He wanted to know what his boss had done in Harston for things to have ended up like that, but Swald replied that there was always an exception in the life of a monster. Patrick asked what that exception was, but it was a long story, and on Swald's lap was the sleeping Mel's. Patrick joked that Swald must have kidnapped a child, but Swald would never do something so troublesome. The skeleton wanted to know where Renee was and why Swald had brought that child, and Swald began to explain. He said he had found her in a human village. Patrick fell silent for a moment. He wanted to know if she had been injured, but Swald said she only appeared tired, nothing more. Perhaps they had been limiting and restricting her life in that place. Patrick began to pace, confused by what he had just heard. He said that if she had been rejected, Swald could have just said so. There was no need to be so poetic about something simple. He teased that now Swald would have to dress like a maid and take care of the dungeon, but Patrick added that his resignation letter was always ready. However, he still wanted to know what his boss would do next, but Swald said there was nothing to do now. They just had to wait, as they didn't know when she would return to them. Patrick let out a dry laugh, understanding what had happened. It was best to leave his boss alone when he was like this. He could be a bit tough, but after a while, before Patrick could finish his thoughts, he saw something. He immediately called out to his boss. He said, "She's here," but Swald didn't quite understand who he meant. The person he had been waiting for the most had arrived. Raina asked if Swald had eaten, and if not, she would prepare something for him. Her eye was different, a different color. Patrick turned to Swald to ask. He wasn't sure if his boss had gone mad or had been sincere enough to give her one of his eyes. Swald explained that her eye had become useless, and if she could see better, she might have handled that monster more easily. As he had said before, she still had that heart, it didn't matter when. He just asked her to see properly, and next time to give him a true stone of love. Renee said that from now on, she would always be with Lord Swallow. Inside the cave, a stalactite dripped as if it were crying. A drop of water fell on Mel's head, waking her up. She wondered where she was as she couldn't remember what happened. Beside her, Patrick was sharpening a blade, which frightened her. Mel's thought she had died and that he was the Reaper, but the skeleton said this wasn't the place she imagined. They were in the center of the elders, and Mel's was extremely surprised by this statement. If this was truly the place, then he wasn't the Reaper but Patrick, who remarked how quick she was to figure things out. Leaving there, she said she didn't know when he would wake up again. Then she gave a strong kick, ordering her boss to wake up immediately. Swald slowly woke up, saying he had been having a good nap and realized that Mel's had woken up. Now everything made sense to her, and she could hardly believe who was standing before her. She bowed, saying he was the beast above all things, the great Lord Swallow. She apologized for her lack of manners and introduced herself as a descendant of Asmodeus Mel's of Linf, which he repeated simultaneously. She was confused, unsure of how he had learned her name. She thought Swald must have told him. She wanted to know where he was, recalling seeing him in the city when they recovered the decapitating blade. Swald explained that it was, in fact, him who had been there with her. But Mel's didn't understand what Lord Swallow had just said. Now he firmly declared that he, standing before her, was Swald. Mel's fell silent for a moment. Then her expression changed, perplexed. She was mortified, realizing she had been by his side without showing any respect. Patrick then changed the subject, bringing up what they had done with the humans. He couldn't believe his boss hadn't mentioned the part involving humans. Now Swald was embarrassed and found himself in a tricky situation. Patrick told him to follow, and Swald, with no other option, agreed. They were now in the forest near the city's border. A woman was walking through despite warnings not to. She remarked that the forest was full of herbs and mushrooms. A noise nearby put her on alert. It was a person, and they were badly injured. The woman approached to help, as she had many herbs with her. Before she could pick any, she was attacked, and was brutally devoured by the strange figure. Someone hooded was walking through the night. As they continued, they said they needed to go on. The dungeon was a battlefield, and to live there, one needed skills. Renee remarked that knowing how to be quiet was a basic rule in Lord Swallow's home, but Mel's didn't want to obey, claiming she was a free monster. She added that she had been there before Swald became a demon king and had come to speak with him. Renee asked her to be quiet as he was sleeping. Turning, Mel said that's why she needed Renee to keep Swald's body warm while he slept, and she mocked Renee, calling her a conservative auntie. That insult was more than Renee could bear, and she shouted for Mel's to call her that one more time. Now Renee was ready to give Mel's a wooden coat. She ordered her to come forward and receive her gift. Patrick was watching everything unfold. Swald complained that they were so noisy he couldn't sleep, but Patrick said Swald had no right to complain since it was his fault. Everything was a mess. Not understanding what was going on, Swald asked if it was really that bad. Patrick realized that Swald didn't read the reports he received. Due to the need to reinforce some of the defenses, the bordering villages were being attacked by monsters, and there was more. The Lord of Harston had killed himself, paralyzing the city. In the last 3 weeks, every news source had only reported 3 pieces of news about Harston. Patrick wanted to know if his boss understood what that meant, but Swald had no idea. Patrick became irritated, thinking his boss spoke without thinking and was about to hand in his resignation letter. However, Swald apologized multiple times. Swald wanted to know what Patrick thought of the situation, but lacking information, Patrick couldn't say for sure. Patrick believed that Harston might have been cut off from all communication with the outside world. Since Swald had destroyed the city, he should know the extent of the damage, but hearing no news from a village was definitely a bad sign. However, the center of the elders relied on that city, as through it they could gauge the size of the subjugation team and know when they would come. They needed to hurry and go to the city. If they waited too long, no one knew what might happen. Swald wished Patrick a good journey and told him not to stress too much, but hoped he would be called to go along as well. Patrick began to leave and mentioned that he would return as soon as possible, much to his boss's surprise. This made Swald happy because he could finally get some sleep and relax in peace. Before departing, Patrick noted that it might be difficult to go alone and that someone should accompany him. Swald quickly got up and looked at the girls who were fighting. Mel's was the first candidate, but she could end up destroying the entire village. That definitely wouldn't be good. Renee volunteered to go with Patrick, but she was an even worse option, so it was better that neither of them accompany Patrick. Since Swald couldn't make a decision, the skeleton suggested that his boss accompany him on the journey instead. Swald realized he had fallen into Patrick's trap like a fish caught in a net, but it didn't take long for him to see a way out. Even though he was the best option, he couldn't change form because his bracelet had broken. The skeleton knew his boss couldn't go with him without that artifact. Swald was relieved now that he could rest in his lair, sleeping and doing nothing. But he was already in human form, cursing his subordinate, wishing for a slow death for him. However, Patrick reminded him that he was already dead. Besides, Swald was the one who said he couldn't go without the bracelet. In other words, if he had the bracelet, he could go without any problem. Swald grumbled as he argued with the skeleton, saying that wasn't exactly what he meant. Soon they arrived in the town, and Patrick remarked that Swald had really put on a show when he destroyed it. As they entered, Patrick explained there were 4 ways to gauge how active a human village was. The first was by how crowded the market was, but there wasn't one there. The second was to see how much smoke came from the chimneys, but it was a bit too late for that now. The third was by the presence of mercenaries or the size of the subjugation team, but there was none of that either. Oswald wished to leave soon. The last way was to go to the bar. Before Patrick could explain further, Oswald had disappeared. He had rushed ahead, saying Patrick was taking too long, much to the skeleton's annoyance at his boss's drinking habits. They entered the bar, happily thinking they'd find something there. But inside, there was nothing. To Patrick, this was the worst possible scenario. The village was no longer functioning. A pile of bodies was stacked in a corner. A drop of rain fell on one of them. The rain began to fall harder and some of the bodies started to move. Lightning lit up the sky and someone remarked that they had all worked hard. After passing through Harston, they would head straight to the imperial capital, as humanity was weaker than ever after the Black Calamity. This was the perfect opportunity to destroy the empire. If the bar was empty, it meant things definitely weren't going well. It was as if the town was completely isolated. While they were there, someone asked who they were. The one who appeared was the bar owner. Nervously, he asked what had brought them to that place. The skeleton introduced himself as a knight from subjugation team, knowing the man was worried they might be thieves or bandits. He'd assured him they only wanted a meal and a place to sleep. After realizing they were customers, the man apologized. But he explained he didn't have any food fit for a knight, and in fact, nowhere in the town would they find any. Patrick asked if this was due to the Black Calamity, and seeing that he knew the reason, the man assumed he would be understanding. He apologized again, explaining that he didn't even have a room prepared. Patrick noted that in this situation, the price of water was higher than that of lodging. He tossed the man a coin, which left him stunned. It was a gold coin, and Patrick asked again why the room wasn't ready yet. Immediately, the man began to serve them, directing them to a room. However, he glanced at Swald suspiciously. He asked who the person following Patrick was. Patrick replied that Swald was his slave. But even as a slave, he was very useful, which was why he treated him well and allowed him to stay in the same room. Now the two were in the room, which was more comfortable than Swald had expected. He chose a bed and remarked that it was much better than the place he had stayed with Mel's. Patrick agreed that it was a very good room, and Swald asked if he couldn't have come up with something better than slave, tell the man. But with those clothes, it was the most appropriate. People would think he was a thief, so slave was a more fitting label. As a slave, he would avoid conflict since people would see him as someone's property, and since he wouldn't change clothes, it was the most practical solution. Patrick then asked if his boss didn't want to move as little as possible. Swald wholeheartedly agreed, saying that in his next life he wanted to be a rock. So he should listen to Patrick's advice now, as what he said was reasonable. Patrick went outside, hoping his boss could rest, but Swald advised him to take it easy on the first day. Patrick thought about that for a moment. He told his boss not to worry too much about him. From above, he could see the extent of the destruction in the city and thought about what might have caused it to crumble so thoroughly. He wondered who the current lord of the city was, as this had piqued his curiosity. Since the imperial family must be furious, it wouldn't be surprising if there was a change in the lord's family. So he headed directly to find out who this person was, making his way to the lord's manor. It was going to be difficult because the security there was better than he expected. There were still many guards keeping watch. Any aggressive interaction with them would only cause more alarm in the city, and that wouldn't be good. So it was wise not to rush into this. As he arrived, there was a spot he wanted to check as soon as possible. Humans couldn't sense it, but he could. That was definitely the smell of a corpse. He just didn't expect it to be there. Meanwhile, Swald lay in his bed thinking. As comfortable as it was, he could never sleep well in these places. The innkeeper knocked on the door, asking if the knight was there. Swald replied that his master had stepped out, but the man had prepared a meal for them. It wasn't good for an innkeeper to leave his guests hungry, and since they had paid so well, it was the least he could do. Since they hadn't been properly introduced, the innkeeper told Swald his name was Novin, and Swald introduced himself. Novin hoped the man wouldn't be too disappointed as there wasn't much food. He then asked if the situation in the city was truly that bad. Novin explained that the Black Calamity had indeed struck, and those who witnessed it almost went mad on the spot. Right after that, the city's lord had taken his own life. Following that, the flow of supplies to the city was cut off, and outside the city walls, you could see the bodies of those who had starved to death. Novin didn't know what they had come to do, but it was best to leave as soon as daylight broke. He added that Swald should know this well himself. What usually happens to people when they're backed into a corner? At the inn's window, a girl made her entrance. She had taken the opportunity to slip in through the window. Now inside the inn, she was pleased to have entered their room. They were outsiders, no doubt staying in the most expensive room of the inn despite knowing the village's dire situation. Clearly, they had a lot of money. She needed to grab whatever she could that could be traded for money. Looking at their clothes, she noticed they looked like rags and began to doubt if they really had any money. But she could use those rags. They were better than what she was wearing. Opening a chest, she found nothing of value inside. This wasn't good. She guessed they must have taken everything with them when they left. She kept searching through a few more drawers in the room. She found an object, apparently they hadn't taken everything. But she had no idea what it was. A noise approached the room. Patrick remarked that he had checked the Lord's manor and asked what his boss had done. Swald, referring to himself as Master, said he had done what Patrick could see. Patrick wished he had seen the new Lord, but the security was too tight, so he had returned empty-handed. He asked if his boss had discovered anything, but Swald threw the question back at him, asking if he really expected that from him. Patrick replied that he was just being polite. It seemed they had been cut off from the outside world. Even the innkeeper didn't know much. Patrick was extremely surprised, almost in shock, that his boss had done something for a change. So that was it. They were cut off. As soon as the day broke, they would continue their search for information. Patrick mentioned they should keep the windows closed. When he had left, only one was open, but now both were, which could lead to them being robbed. Swald insisted he hadn't touched the windows. Patrick joked that it must have been a ghost. Swald replied that ghosts or not, someone had opened them, and it wasn't him. That's when it dawned on both of them. They began searching the room from top to bottom. Swald realized that his coat, made by Renee, was no longer there. Patrick's item had also disappeared, and he asked if his boss had seen what he had stored there. Swald had no idea what had been stolen from him. Patrick became worried because what had been taken was one of his ribs. The thief, Rosalina, was running through the streets of the city, hurrying. What she had managed to steal should be enough. Someone stopped her and called her by name, Rosalina. He wanted to know where she had been, wandering through the night like that. He had already warned her not to walk around the city alone at night, but she said it was for a good cause, for everyone's benefit. He reprimanded her, saying she shouldn't exhaust herself as it would only make her hungrier. She insisted that it was for a good reason. Another person approached, telling Toth not to be so harsh on her. This person was their leader, and he was now awake. Thieves shouldn't be afraid of the dark, he said, but going out at night without telling anyone was definitely not acceptable. She should be more considerate of the others, wandering around doing as she pleased. This place was different from the home that had welcomed her so warmly. She promised to be more careful, and the leader then asked what she was carrying. She asked him to wait a moment. Rosalina presented the items she had stolen, prompting the leader to ask if she had taken them from someone. She confirmed it, saying she had gotten them from the inn. She had taken them from the most expensive room, and they were well guarded, so it must be a valuable artifact. The leader put his hands on his head, trying to explain to her what it was. It was a person's rib. She was shocked, not realizing they were human bones. Toth asked if she had robbed a grave, but the leader said she wouldn't proudly present it if that were the case. That bone was likely from a degenerate hobby or used for magical rituals. He explained that the world was full of degenerates who mutilated slaves just to make exotic ornaments. If it belonged to someone who practiced necromancy, it was definitely dangerous. Also, those clothes she stole were strange, like something a beggar would wear. But the fabric used to make them was of high quality. It didn't take long for him to realize that she hadn't even checked the pockets of the clothes. Inside, there was a handful of gold coins, to everyone's surprise. However, he became apprehensive, knowing it wasn't the time to be happy about it. Still, Rosalina insisted that this time she had targeted the right place. Thinking to himself, the leader realized that guests staying in the most expensive room at the inn, possessing a human rib, wearing high-quality fabric, and carrying a bag full of gold coins were not the kind of people they should have messed with. Just then, Patrick and Swald appeared, saying they had come to take back what was stolen from them. They said they were expecting to see all of them. It seemed like everyone was safe. Patrick mentioned to his boss that those clothes were a gift from Ren. Just thinking about what might happen if those clothes were really stolen made him fear the girl's reaction. The leader of the thieves told his people to step back from the situation. Patrick asked if he was the leader but didn't get a response. He then wanted to know how they were found so quickly. The leader guessed that the item must have called for its owner. Swald only wanted to resolve the issue and get back to sleep. Patrick decided to let this one slide as his boss had spent the entire day walking around. Patrick then asked the thief if he wasn't going to return what he had stolen, even after being caught, but the thief argued that he had no guarantee it would be left in peace if he returned the items. He had a point, and the thief was intrigued, wondering how they had found them so quickly, even though Rosalina had left no traces. That would be impossible unless they were some kind of monster, or perhaps they were users of dark magic. He asked if they lived in the shadows, to which Patrick responded that it was pretty dark in their cave. Now the thief believed they were necromancers and asked if the item was important to them. Patrick replied that it was part of his body. The thief thought Patrick was treating the item as if it were a part of himself, but Patrick firmly clarified once again that it was indeed a part of him. Suddenly, the thief threw the rib high into the air. He ordered his group to flee quickly. Patrick rushed desperately to catch his rib. He managed to grab it just in time. However, standing beside him was someone ready to strike him on the head. The blow was delivered with great force, shattering the weapon as it collided with Patrick's helmet. The attacker realized that no damage had been inflicted. Despite everything happening, Swald only yawned sleepily. The weapon used to attack Patrick was a rock, which made Swald comment on how dire the situation must be in this place. Just then, someone approached to attack from behind. As soon as the blade touched Swald's body, it completely shattered. Before the attacker could flee, he was captured. Still holding the man, Swall turned to Patrick, calling him master, and asked what he should do with him. Patrick suggested they should knock all of them out. Swall corrected him, saying that wasn't quite what he meant, but they should give the same treatment to all of them. It didn't take long for Patrick to soften up the first troublemaker. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, the girls were talking, wondering if Swald was doing all right. It had only been half a day since they had left. Nothing dangerous should be happening to Swald, but Ren was uneasy, thinking her boss might not have eaten yet. Mel's reassured her, saying she was overthinking it, and that skipping a meal wasn't the end of the world. She reminded Ren that they were just in a human village, nothing more. Patrick returned, saying it had been more troublesome than he expected, and Swald was happy to have recovered his clothes. He just wished they had a map or some information and thought it was best to finish things up quickly. Turning back to Swald, Patrick noticed something he didn't like. Swald was lying on the ground, and the thief leader remarked that it was more comfortable than one might imagine. Nearby, the girl approached, apologizing for what she had done. She admitted that she was the one who had stolen their belongings and that the others had nothing to do with it. She was the only one to blame. Tough rushed to get her to flee, fearing they might still be hostile. Swald pointed out that they knew her intentions weren't exactly noble. He ordered Patrick to handle the situation, and Patrick moved toward her. Both the man and the girl were terrified now. She pulled out a knife, saying she would attack if he came any closer. Rosalina clutched a cross in her hand. For a brief moment, it was as if she became someone else. Patrick noticed something strange about the whole situation. The man attacked him, but it was futile. Patrick was already standing before the girl. He looked closely at her and the object in her hand. Patrick asked where she had gotten that cross. It was a rosary resembling an inverted cross with a phoenix, and it emitted mana. He recognized it as mana used for surveillance. The girl tried to explain that this wasn't something one would expect to find in the hands of someone from the outskirts. Patrick called out to his boss, who asked what was going on. Patrick explained that the people were being watched by someone. The moment the girl took hold of the item, it emitted mana. It seemed to activate under certain conditions. Patrick suggested that if they figure out the details, they could understand the intentions of the person who had set this up. Swald remarked that the sea wasn't known for its magic, and the whole situation was bizarre. Patrick wanted to get them to cooperate and asked for Swald's help, but Swald doubted Patrick would get anywhere. Patrick, however, was quite sharp and said he had a brilliant idea for this situation. He apologized to the thieves, explaining that it wasn't just the theft that had prompted their reaction. They had received orders from the royal family not to leave any trace of those they came into conflict with. He claimed they were part of a secret group directly serving the imperial family, the Rona Mist, Knights of the Shadows. The thieves had never heard of such a group before. Patrick assured them that he had no intention of causing harm now and that they could relax. They asked what the knight was doing there. Patrick explained that his mission was to save the city. That was his true purpose in the area. The only reason he was going against his orders was that he needed information they might have. He needed to assess the situation quickly to send reinforcements and supplies to the city. Patrick asked if they weren't interested in helping, as he also needed their assistance. Murmurs ran through the group of thieves as they discussed what the knight had just said. They ultimately decided to help the knight. The persuasion had worked, and Patrick remarked that it was easy to handle people in situations like this. Swald, however, wanted to know if they could go back already. However, they needed to stay longer. Patrick was uncovering more loose ends in the situation. Swald noticed that Patrick was excited, but it only made things more tedious for him. Now Swald understood what people meant by keeping an eye on the enemies around you, but Patrick didn't quite get that comment. Patrick asked him to get up, saying that given how things were going, Swald would need to do some work too. Swald grumbled, accusing Patrick of being too enthusiastic and asking if he couldn't handle things on his own. Patrick was disappointed by this. Patrick planned to keep an eye on the captain, who seemed the most suspicious of them all, while Swald would blend in with the others. Swald didn't expect to have to stay so close to people, but they had no choice. Between the knight and the slave, only one of them would have an easier time blending in with the common folk. Patrick urged him to try to blend in, mimicking their behaviors. Swald resisted, complaining that he didn't want to imitate humans. He remarked that they spent most of the day sleeping and the rest of it being tired, going through their lives without much motivation. He realized he just needed to keep doing what he always did. They had to investigate the religion that gave out the rosary, and the faster they gathered the information, the quicker they could return home. He reminded himself to maintain composure, even though humans could be quite rude. People began asking questions about the knight's secret origins. They assumed he must come from a place with abundant food. The constant chatter was overwhelming, and Swald found it unbearable. He didn't know how to get closer to them, feeling suffocated by their presence. If he had the choice, he would have devoured them without hesitation. But he remembered he needed to be friendly, so he started talking to a child. The boy asked if he had seen the heroes in person, but Swald didn't know who they were, although the name sounded familiar. Meanwhile, the girl who had stolen from them approached him. She apologized again for taking their belongings. Swald shrugged it off, saying it was fine since he had them back now. Toth, standing nearby, explained that he was temporarily replacing the captain and had been ordered to carry out Swald's wishes. Toth asked if Swald was truly there to save Harston, and Swald confirmed. Toph then suggested that if Swald wanted to know how the village really was, he should see it with his own eyes. He offered to guide Swald even though Swald didn't want to go along with it or understand why it was suddenly necessary. But staying meant more questions from the people, so he agreed to follow Toph's lead. They headed to the residential area first and Swald asked where all the people were. Toph said Swald would know once he opened the door. Toph placed his hand on the door and pushed it open. Inside were only bodies of those who had succumbed to starvation. In that place, even theft wasn't an option because there was simply no food, and they didn't know how much longer they could endure without it. Swald wanted to know one thing. When there is famine, the people's anger is usually directed at the town's lord. He wondered why the people there hadn't revolted despite their hunger. Toph explained that it had been about a month since the Black Disaster hit the city. He wondered why the city remained calm, why its people hadn't revolted yet. Toph asked if Swald wasn't curious about this. Meanwhile, back at the dungeon, Mel's and Ren were sitting at a table. Mel's mentioned how boring it was to stay there without anything to do and that she wished she had gone with them. Ren reassured her, saying Swald had left for the good of everyone, and that was noble of him. It was a demonstration of his trust in them to leave him alone, but Ren believed he trusted her more than he did Mel's. Mel stood up, realizing she should have noticed that sooner. Ren told her to stay focused, as they never knew when humans might try to invade the dungeon. Mel said she was always keeping an eye on things and had just checked the place 10 minutes ago, using her magic to observe. While they were talking, Mel's noticed something strange. Her magic reacted, someone had entered the dungeon. Since it wasn't an intense reaction, it was likely only one person. Ren stood up and told Mel's to prepare as well. The liquid in their cups began to ripple. Whoever the intruder was, they were already approaching. With calm steps, the intruder asked why they were in such a frenzy. It was an unexpected visit and Mel's wondered why Renee was reacting the way she was. The intruder, Bathory, asked if Renee had been well since they last saw each other. Renee began to apologize, saying she hadn't known about the visit, otherwise she would have prepared something better for Bathory. But Bathory told her not to worry, as she had come unannounced. However, if Renee really wanted to do something, she could give Bathory some tomato juice, but Renee quickly replied that it was out of reach. Hearing that, Bathory could only lament. She then looked at Mel's, curious about the new person in the dungeon. Mel's proudly introduced herself, saying she was a demon king and a descendant of Asmodeus. Renee introduced Bathory as well, explaining that she was the ruler of the castle of Chait. Bathory commented that the young demon king had an interesting aura. Hearing all this, Mel's discreetly asked if she was destined to meet every dungeon lord if she stayed there forever. Renee didn't like the forever part and commented that her colleague was quite the comedian. However, Bathory overheard and asked if Mel's didn't yet belong to the dungeon, and Mel's confirmed that she didn't. A servant of Bathory appeared to attend to her, and Bathory inquired about where Patrick and that other annoying person were. She was soon informed that both had left the dungeon, much to her surprise. Bathory hadn't expected them to leave during such troubling times. Her unexpected reaction prompted Renee to ask if something had happened. Bathory explained that the villagers near her castle had all been wiped out. However, there were no bodies left at the site. She didn't believe it was the work of human hands, as the tomato juice seemed to flow to one location as if the path had been carved out. At the end of that path lay the city of Haston, and Bathory was intrigued by the situation. Hearing about the missing bodies, Mel suggested it might have been the work of the undead. However, Bathory disagreed, explaining that if that were the case, not many beings would be capable of such an act. Most of the undead lack intelligence, and those that do are called elders, holding a higher title than the rest. If an undead army is moving in unison, someone must be controlling them. The Lord of the Undead, King Erebos the Immortal, was one possible suspect that came to Bathory's mind. Upon hearing that name, Mel's became a bit uneasy. Although Bathory had no evidence, she had come to the dungeon to speak with Swald and asked if there were any messenger monsters available in the dungeon. Renee responded that they currently had none. There was no way to communicate, but Renee firmly believed in her leader. Bathory noticed this determination and felt pity for the girl. Bathory hoped that Patrick would have something helpful to share, as they didn't have much they could do to establish communication with him at the moment. But Mel's was excited, thinking her time to shine had come. Meanwhile, Toph was explaining to Swald that after the Black Disaster, someone had set fire to the city's fields. With the fields lost, all of the crops were destroyed, and soon after, a rumor spread among the people that whatever remained after the disaster had been contaminated. The people began to believe the land was cursed, and that they had been abandoned by the emperor, falling into despair. Despite that, some still held on to hope. A wealthy commoner couple began helping the people. They had seeds that weren't contaminated, and they shared them with the townsfolk. But just when hope was rising again, something happened. The couple was found dead in their home, perhaps killed by some greedy person, and once again, hope vanished from the city. Without hope, there was no cooperation among the people. Those in the outskirts had survived so far only because of the rumors that the seeds were contaminated. They had eaten them and suffered no consequences. Swald realized that without his involvement, the seeds wouldn't have been contaminated. Someone had spread a false rumor. It was time for them to move to the next location. Some guards were protecting the entrance. At first, they believed they could overcome this situation easily, and the pile of bodies nearby was the result of that false belief. To avoid attracting insects in the streets, they dug holes and piled up the bodies like that. Swald asked why they hadn't burned them. Toth explained that the mourning was still too strong. It was a delicate situation for the survivors. Toth then revealed that the couple who had helped the city had a daughter. Rosalina was their daughter, and her parents were somewhere in that pile of bodies. Understanding this, Swald gained a clearer picture of the situation. He asked if the guards were always stationed there, and it became clear that they weren't protecting anything, they were controlling it. Guards stationed at the gate like that had to be following the orders of the Lord, which made this person even more suspicious. Meanwhile, Patrick was on top of a building. The best approach in this situation was to deal with the guards directly since they needed to uncover their plans. That's why Patrick had stolen a harpy egg to create a major distraction. He marveled at his brilliant plan, massaging his own ego, telling himself how clever he was. At first, that was his plan. But the only problem was that he hadn't expected so many of them to come. Up on the rooftop, he sighed. Meanwhile, the sky was filled with harpies. Inside a nearby house, a woman was confronted with something she didn't want to see. Her brother had hung himself by the neck. From his mouth came morbid words telling her she needed to stay alive. The woman woke up startled. It had all been just a nightmare. Sweating in distress, she brought her hand to her head, trying to regain her composure. Upon hearing all this, the servant asked her lady if she had experienced another nightmare. But the lady, Larissa Nivier, the Lord of Harston, said she was fine. Seeing her stand up, the servant asked if she wasn't going to continue resting, but Larissa Nivier said she needed some fresh air. It had only been a few weeks since she became the Lord, but she vividly remembered the day her brother passed away. Her family had abandoned the place, and she knew there was only one way for her to overcome the situation. She needed to revive the city at all costs. Speaking now to a mysterious figure, she demanded that he fulfill his promise as he had promised salvation for them. He had said he would protect her and the territory as well. The figure confirmed that's exactly what he had said. She was furious, asking him to look out the window and tell her if what he saw was salvation. However, the figure responded that he hadn't gone against his word, assuring her that she shouldn't worry and that soon the city would be saved. Laura Sinivier thought he was never clear in his words, but there was nothing she could do except trust him. The man insisted that everything was progressing smoothly and she should continue living comfortably in the meantime. Soon, all of her problems would disappear. Sitting down, she acknowledged his words, saying she understood and would trust him and wait a little longer. At that moment, someone entered the hall with a message about the territory's security. Several harpies had gathered at the northern gate, and a lone knight had dealt with them all. She wanted to know who he was and whom he served. The gatekeeper had asked the same, but the knight remained silent. Laura Sinivier decided she wanted to meet him, and the servant said she would bring him to the castle. The man before her urged caution, suggesting the knight could be an assassin in disguise. But despite the suspicions, Laura Sinivier felt his actions deserved gratitude, and as the Lord, she had to offer it. She ordered the knight to be brought before her. Meanwhile, Patrick finally met with Laura Sinivier and thanked her for receiving him. He expressed how difficult and exhausting the journey to the city had been, but standing before her made him feel his efforts were rewarded. She acknowledged his hard work in protecting the city, and on behalf of all the citizens, expressed her gratitude. Patrick thanked her, but he could tell from her demeanor that she lacked experience and suspected she was the younger sister of the previous lord. It wasn't long before she asked whom he served. A heavy silence filled the room. Seeing that he wouldn't respond, she asked for his name. Patrick explained that he was in a position where he couldn't reveal such details and hoped for her understanding. All these secrets made her curious, and she asked if he would remove his helmet if she requested it. Patrick explained that his face was marked with scars and that half of it was missing skin, but if she truly wanted to see, he would oblige. However, if he was hiding his face for that reason, she wouldn't force him, and although the city had little to offer, she still wanted to pay him. She asked what he desired. Patrick asked for food, knowing it was the most valuable item in the city at the moment. Depending on her answer, he might learn more about her. Without hesitation, Laura Sinivier agreed, to which Patrick promptly thanked her. Now he thought that given her quick response, there might be plenty of food in the castle. If that were the case, why had she allowed the city to fall into such misery? Additionally, he could sense something strange about the man standing with her. Being undead, Patrick felt a kind of familial bond between them. Patrick said he had one more question. There was something that had been bothering him from the start. He asked the man what he was and who he served. The figure remained silent. Elsewhere, Patrick was recounting the events to Swald. Swald asked if the Lord had let him leave easily after such a direct question, and Patrick admitted he had asked out of pure curiosity. Even though he sensed a connection between them, Swald asked why Patrick hadn't done anything. Patrick explained that he couldn't fight there and he wasn't certain of the man's nature. Depending on the situation, human necromancers could give off the same energy. Swald joked that he would have just punched him, but Patrick reminded him they were there to solve the problem he had caused, not to create more complications. Swald apologized. Patrick then asked if Swald had discovered anything, to which Swald replied that the people hadn't eaten the grains, believing they were contaminated and they were starving. He also mentioned that Rosalina kept running away, making it hard to talk to her. Patrick commented that it would have been helpful if they had some kind of mind control magic, suggesting that Mel's would be useful in that case. Swald, frustrated, complained about being dragged along and having to listen to that. Patrick then presented the food he had received from the Lord in a bag. Swald thought it was for eating, but Patrick wanted to use it as a way to get closer to Rosalina. Swald stood before Rosalina, who looked visibly frightened. He asked her why she was so tense and offered her some food, suggesting they share it. She hesitated at first, but was clearly hungry. She recognized the biscuit as something made by the priest, and her face lit up as she received it. Swald asked who this priest was. Rosalina seemed delighted that she had found someone who shared her faith, as in her circle, she was the only believer. To her, not believing was foolish. All one needed was faith to be saved. She asked if Swald agreed, to which he replied uncomfortably, yes. After much walking, they finally arrived at the place she had been leading him to. For some reason, it always felt strange arriving there. Torches lit the way, though the path was still dark, so Rosalina advised Swald to be careful with his steps. The priest began to speak, saying that Calamity had come to punish sins, and that among them was an omnipotent being capable of solving everything. As his devoted followers, they were to be revered for being chosen. The congregation agreed, and Rosalina asked Swald to sit down. During the sermon, the priest reminded them not to forget the divine word, and that they would eat the blessings provided by this figure. To Swald, it all seemed like brainwashing. Suddenly, everyone stood up. Rosalina mentioned that they had arrived just in time for the Eucharist. This was when the priest offered them the biscuits, the same kind that Patrick had received from the Lord. Swald wondered why those biscuits were also in the castle. Rosalina whispered to Swald, saying that whoever believed in the priest would receive eternal life and happiness, and for those who were close to him, they would receive an even greater blessing. Swald asked what this greater blessing was, but Rosalina couldn't say for sure. While they were talking, the priest approached her, giving her another biscuit, her blessing for the day, which she gratefully accepted. He offered one to Swald as well, noting that he hadn't seen him before but hoped he would return. Taking the biscuit, Swald said he would think about it. Sensing suspicious energy, Swald asked what the meaning of all this was. The priest immediately became nervous, realizing that Swald was onto something. Swald stated that humans couldn't see mana, but he could clearly see through the priest's tricks. Approaching the priest, Swald declared that he didn't care what he did with the humans. During the sermon, Swald had seen the flow of mana spread throughout the place. He finished by warning the priest not to keep investigating him. The priest realized then that Swald wasn't human. Rosalina, watching them closely, asked if something was wrong, but Swald simply thanked the priest for offering them food. When Rosalina returned home, she thanked Swald for the day. There were so many suspicious things happening that Swald figured he didn't need solid evidence to confirm his suspicions. Both the priest and the man beside the Lord seemed to be behind everything. Later in the city, Mels was excited to meet up with Swald again. She asked what was bothering him, to which he replied that it was his growing frustration. Mels, curious to see the place he had destroyed, commented on how beautiful the view was from above, but Swald knew she wasn't there just out of curiosity. Mels then informed him that Bathory had visited and that Harston was about to face trouble with the undead. She mentioned that something suspicious had happened near Bathory's castle, and the traces led to this very place. Additionally, Bathory had pointed out someone as a probable suspect. The possible culprit was Erevos. Despite hearing all this, Swald acknowledged that it was only a possibility that Erevos was responsible. Mels explained that she had thought a lot about the situation, as a place taken over by the undead is typically overwhelmed by their numbers, which are vast. Even though Haston wasn't in a good state, the situation seemed peculiar. If Erevos was involved, he had chosen a different method of attack, and Mels had a hunch about what it might be. She planted her staff in the ground, suggesting that he was using the local mana flow. Using a mana detection spell, she confirmed that her theory was correct. Around the city, there was a large pile of bodies stacked up. The man who called himself the priest stood before them. Placing his hands on the ground, he invoked a spell. He was Lich Simon Magus, disguised as a human. The pile of bodies rose into the air. A shadowy figure appeared and began to speak with him. This was indeed Erebus, the Lord of all deaths. It was his last communication before his servant arrived in the city. Listening to him, Erebus acknowledged that he would not forget all of his servant's efforts. The servant expressed that he had done everything. Knowing the grandeur of Erebus' plans, Erebus then inquired if there was anything else his servant wished to convey. The servant reported that there was an unexpected intruder in the city. Erebus had already heard this from another servant and asked if the intruder was wearing armor and emitted an undead energy. But the servant replied that this intruder lacked those characteristics and instead exuded a connection to deep darkness. Erebus pondered who could be connected to such an energy. The servant, noticing Erebus' reflection, asked if he knew who this person might be, but Erebus didn't believe this individual would still be active. Regardless, Erebus and his followers needed Harston as a stepping stone to reach the imperial capital, and they had to proceed with great caution. Magus apologized for his inability to deal with the problem. Ummel, the other servant, had already asked for help and received reinforcements. Magus was asked if he planned to do the same. However, Magus declined, stating that he didn't need assistance just yet, but he would send a message if the situation changed. As Erebus disappeared, he left the decision to Magus. Magus was confident that soon the undead would take over the land. It didn't matter who appeared, they wouldn't be able to deal with them, except for that one particular monster. Meanwhile, Swald asked Mel's if she could identify the person who cast the magic in that location. She explained that it wasn't possible to know exactly. A large-scale magic like that usually involved maintaining a steady flow of mana. This meant the caster could either be nearby or using a medium to channel the spell remotely. If a medium were being used, it would require a significant amount of mana. Pointing to a specific spot, Mel suggested that the medium was likely located there, the most suspicious place of all, the Lord's castle. Still, it was only a supposition without absolute certainty. Patrick had already taken charge of the situation, and Swald asked if Mel's was too busy. She replied that she wasn't, so he invited her to accompany him to the castle. It was time, he said confidently, to replace one of the malevolences in the dungeon. Surprised, Mel's agreed. The moonlight illuminated the area outside the castle. As the knight had expected, this was indeed the most suspicious place. The smell of corpses was even stronger here. The underground area was useless in this situation. Soon, Swald began hearing strange noises from within. As he moved forward, he came across something, a large zombie handling corpses, explaining the foul stench. It had been a long time since Swald had encountered such a being. Interrupting the creature, Swald apologized for doing so and asked who its master was. The zombie turned to face him, but said nothing in response before attacking. It was a blow befitting its size, but it was so slow that it would never land. Swald blocked the strike, using only his fingers. Even with both hands, the zombie's strength was pitiful. For such a creature to be in the castle, Swald wondered if the Lord was involved. While breaking the zombie's axe with his fingers, Swald decided that secrecy was no longer necessary, as they now had confirmation of everything going on. With one swift motion, he ended the abominable creature's existence. The flame's glow changed color as he muttered about how filthy the place was. Suddenly, something approached from behind. His helmet went flying, having been struck. Swald hadn't expected this and was slightly surprised. Standing before him was a Dullahan, and Swald wanted to know what preparations were underway. Patrick tried speaking with the monster, but it was in vain. He asked who had ordered the Dullahan to protect the place, but the creature remained silent. It wasn't long before the Dullahan struck Patrick with his sword, but Patrick managed to defend himself. The weapon in his enemy's hands was a cursed sword, making it a difficult opponent as the blade corroded any weapon it touched. Though Patrick's opponent wielded the sword, its power was much greater than the wielder's own. Nevertheless, Patrick tried to be diplomatic, attempting to communicate undead to undead. However, there was no dialogue. Both were intelligent, and Patrick understood that this silence indicated something more significant. The lord of the place must have all the answers. Placing his hand on the ground, Patrick invoked a spell. It caused his enemy to slip and lose contact with the ground, giving Patrick enough time to grab what remained of his sword from the floor. His adversary prepared for another strike. Using reinforcement magic on the sword stump, Patrick managed to sever the Dullahan's head from his body. Patrick only took action because the creature refused to engage in dialogue. Now he intended to finish the job in the blink of an eye. The monster realized it was in serious trouble. Patrick claimed the cursed sword for himself, remarking that the creature no longer seemed to need it. With a single swift movement, Patrick sliced the monster into pieces, leaving its body fragmented like a vacant lot. Inside the castle, the Lord Lurasiniviere was awake. She got out of bed, shivering from the cold. From the shadows, a voice asked if she had slept well. Turning to see who it was, she found Patrick cloaked in the shadows. She screamed in fear, startled that he had entered her chambers in the dead of night. But Patrick coldly stated that it was obvious he had urgent matters to discuss with her. He asked if her name was Lala. Pointing his sword at her, he warned that she had only 5 minutes, no more, to summon the man who had been with her earlier. With everyone gathered, Patrick apologized for summoning them at such an hour, but he said he had come across something interesting during his nighttime walk. He threw a head onto the center table. Lurasiniviere, confused, didn't recognize what it was, but Patrick wasn't convinced by her ignorance. It was the helmet of a Dullahan. Getting straight to the point, Patrick demanded to know why she was associated with the undead. Still bewildered, she asked what he was insinuating. Patrick pressed further, accusing her of pretending not to know anything. If she wasn't in control, then surely she had no idea what was happening in her own castle. The man beside Lurasiniviere urged her to call the guards and ignore Patrick's accusations, but Patrick nonchalantly mentioned that he had already dealt with the Dullahan in the basement. Now everyone was shocked by this revelation. The Lord hadn't imagined something like that existed beneath the castle. Moreover, there was a pile of bodies down there, and Patrick gave her another hint. The man standing next to her was also an undead. Lurasiniviere refused to believe Patrick's accusations, claiming that there wasn't enough evidence. Besides, the man had promised her that he would save Harston. To accuse him would put the future of the city at risk, and she couldn't accept that. Patrick questioned whether she truly understood who was endangering the city. Overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information, Laracinivier was at a loss for words. The man tried to calm with parties, noting that Dullahans were rare and not easily found. Patrick acknowledged this, admitting that he hadn't expected to encounter one and that something about the Dullahan had seemed off. The creature didn't speak during the battle, despite having intelligence, and its movements were unusual. After burning its soul, Patrick had investigated further. Inside its armor, there was something that had been controlling its mind, along with the name of the armor's original owner, Masham. Masham had been the vice captain of the Harder Brothers assault force, who led an attack on the undead 30 years ago. He was said to have been a powerful knight, but he disappeared after the assault. The question was, who were the undead that they had tried to fight back then? Raising his sword, Patrick said he would now ask his question differently. This time he wanted a direct answer. Where was their master, Erevos? Laracinivier, still confused by the entire interaction, couldn't comprehend what was happening. To her, Erevos was just the name of a monster guarding a dungeon. The man accused by Patrick began to laugh uncontrollably. Laracinivier, shocked, couldn't understand why he was laughing. Turning to him, she demanded to know if everything he had promised her about saving the territory had been a lie. Finally, the man admitted that it had all been a deception. The plan might change now, but there was nothing she could do about it. A peaceful resolution was no longer an option. He extended his hand, preparing to finish her off. But before he could act, Patrick swiftly severed his hand from his arm. Patrick was in control of the situation, warning them both to calm down or things would get chaotic. The now one-handed man showed no reaction to the loss of his limb. However, Laracinivier realized then that he was indeed undead. Removing his hood, the man introduced himself as Yuhumul and declared that he would slaughter everyone there. They should feel honored to join the ranks of the undead, as it was all part of a much larger plan. The plan of his master, Erevos, the Lord of all Deaths. Hearing this, Patrick questioned why the undead usually won their battles through sheer numbers. He hadn't expected such a stealthy and well-orchestrated invasion. Yuhumul complimented Patrick's accomplishments, admitting that he hadn't expected him to defeat Masham. It was the first time Patrick had been praised for defeating someone's minion. Yuhumul was now more curious about Patrick, a fellow undead knight, yet one who didn't serve Lord Erevos. Laracinivier, still stunned, hadn't seen any of this coming. The knight who saved Laracinivier was, in fact, undead himself. They needed a lord who would cooperate and protect the land, and Patrick wasn't keen on giving her a wooden coat as a gift. He mentioned that his mood had soured, and someone would have to pay the price. Once again, he severed another hand from the lich's body. Patrick wasn't playing around. He warned that it would be wise for the lich to obey, as he had little patience left. The lich retorted that threats wouldn't work on him, but Patrick countered that they had much to lose in this situation. Patrick hinted that the person accompanying him was far stronger than the lich imagined, strong enough to easily ruin all his plans. The lich acknowledged that humans would also be caught in the process. Patrick reminded him that he wasn't on the side of humans and urged the lich to spill everything before he lost his temper further. He also demanded to know what Erevos was planning. Under this pressure, the lich agreed to reveal what he knew. He started by asking Patrick if he knew how an elder was created. Patrick cut him off, ordering him to stop with the questions and get to the point. In the case of a human or elf, creating an elder required a massive amount of hatred. They were called elders because they could single-handedly deal with 1,000 zombies, without assistance from anyone or anything. Erevos was powerful enough to create these elders with just his magic. The reason they isolated Harston and established a religion was to create more elders. They needed humans with living bodies but weakened souls. It was the perfect place to gather the undead, and the isolation had weakened the resolve of the people. The same went for the creation of the religion. Patrick understood that, but he pressed the lich on why there were so many bodies, to which the lich explained that it was to create even more elders. Their ultimate goal was to destroy the Empire. Patrick commented that this was not a pleasant plan. If the Empire fell and everyone became zombies, Erevos' next target would be the 7 great evil dungeons. As Patrick pieced it together, the lich cast a spell in front of him. A large magic circle appeared beneath them. Laracinivier tried to flee from the shadows that emerged. The lich taunted Patrick, saying he was a fool if he thought the lich couldn't cast magic without his hands. He also scoffed at Patrick's belief that he would tell him the truth. Furthermore, there was no being capable of standing against Lord Erevos. The only one who could have done anything was the ancient monster, who retreated for long periods every time it took action. And now nothing could stop his master's plans. If that was true, Patrick said, he had just one more question for the lich. The lich couldn't believe it as Patrick began breaking the magical bindings with just his strength alone. From everything Patrick had heard, it didn't matter how grand the lich's plans were. If the ancient monster appeared, all those plans would crumble. To the lich, this suggestion was absurd. To his surprise, rocks began falling from above. From outside, smoke and debris filled the air. Patrick could hardly believe what he was seeing. It was perfect timing. Swald had just arrived. Laracinivier coughed as dust filled the room. She heard someone complaining about hitting their head. It was Mel's, grumbling that the building was far too fragile. Patrick, with his usual sarcasm, commented that Mel's had impeccable timing. Swald asked Patrick what he had discovered, and the skeleton replied that he now knew everything. It didn't take long for Swald to spot Laura Sinevier, who was still standing there. As he glanced upward, distracted, a red energy spear was hurled at him. But Swald deflected it as if swatting a fly. From the rubble, someone started to rise, much to Mel's surprise, who hadn't expected the commotion. Swald, however, had no intention of standing idle and used his shadow to bind the rising figure. The Lich was now impaled by spikes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He recognized this power. Patrick reminded the Lich of what he had said about his companion being far stronger than expected. Swald, casually observing, asked what all of this was about while the Lich grew increasingly terrified. Standing before the ancient monster, the Lich couldn't even muster a response. He couldn't sense the crystal's energy from the upper floor anymore, and based on the energy from Mel's, he knew she was a demon lord. He realized he needed to buy as much time as possible and inform Lord Arevos of everything. The Lich nervously asked what the ancient monster was doing in a place like this. He had assumed the monster would be hiding after the destruction in the city. Before he could finish speaking, something struck him. Outside the castle, debris flew everywhere. The Lich lay on the ground, wounded after that strike, and declared that they had all arrived too late. Mel's cast a spell while commenting that the Lich talked too much. Meanwhile, Swald yawned, feeling incredibly sleepy. He noticed that the Lich was smiling, remarkably resilient even while being consumed by Mel's magic. As the Lich was engulfed, he declared that they should worship Arevos, for he had finally descended upon the land. Patrick rushed to inform Swald, but Swald, already aware of the situation, remarked that Arevos' entrance was unnecessarily dramatic. Outside, the residents noticed the sky growing darker and began looking up. People in the city started to run in panic. Rosalina was among them, moving quickly through the streets. Someone called her name, causing her to turn. It was Thought, awake and asking her the same. She explained that she had gone for a walk to clear her mind and had ventured to Jarbet Plaza. Immediately, she regretted mentioning it, knowing that nobody went there because of the pollution. She apologized, expecting him to be angry with her. Rosalina stood in silence, bracing for reprimand. To her surprise, That said nothing, simply asking if she had truly gone there. The captain had gathered everyone, reaching a decision. They would abandon the city at the next nightfall. Thought wasn't sure what she thought about the decision, but he shared that the captain didn't trust those knights. He urged her to follow him, promising to explain everything along the way. Soon, the two stood before a pile of bodies. Buried within that pile were the remains of Rosalina's parents. Dot told her that once they left, it would be a long time before they could return. However, the choice to stay or go was hers, and she should do what she thought was best. Rosalina confessed that she didn't fully understand why the captain wanted to abandon the city. She had believed the place could still be saved. Thought made no effort to convince her, admitting they didn't know what would happen. He acknowledged that she held onto her faith. She pondered this, reflecting on how it wasn't just God who saved people, but their actions as well. Thinking deeply, she realized that her own actions might bring salvation. With her hands clenched tightly, she stared at the pile of corpses and agreed with Thought. He watched her with patience. Handing her a torch, he asked if she was truly ready to do this. She responded that she was. Now with the torch in hand, she looked at the bodies. It took her some time to make a move. As she extended the torch toward the pile, a hand suddenly stopped her. A man, wondering who would visit such a place so late at night, interrupted her. Thought didn't know who he was. The man asked Rosalina what she was doing in a place like that. It was the pastor of her church. The pastor's interference surprised Rosalina. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held onto her tightly. The flames from the torch licked his arm. Thought urged him to let go of Rosalina. Soon they both caught a whiff of the stench coming from the pastor's body. Rosalina told him he should put out the fire quickly. The pastor suddenly flung her aside. Before she could hit the ground, Thought caught her, but the force of the throw sent both of them tumbling. Now Thought stared at the pastor with growing suspicion. The pastor's body began to change as it was engulfed in flames. Before their eyes, he revealed his true form as an undead. Both Rosalina and Thought were terrified by this sudden revelation. The undead pastor warned them to stay quiet, for his master was descending from the heavens. Their shock only grew as the pile of corpses around them began to stir. The eyes of the dead started glowing with a macabre scarlet hue. Rosalina could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Soon, the corpses began to move and walk. Thought urged her to run. The first thing they needed to do was escape immediately, as the zombies were already pursuing them. They managed to find shelter in a nearby house. They shoved all the furniture inside against the door, forming a small barricade that would buy them some time. Rosalina collapsed to the ground, saying she wasn't sure she could move anymore. However, Thought reminded her that they had no choice. It wasn't safe outside, and they needed to get to the next floor. She told him that her legs were paralyzed. He insisted that she climb onto his back as they needed to leave immediately. With Rosalina on his back, Thought ascended the stairs. Rosalina thanks him, knowing that he's also weakened. Through the window, they can see what is happening in the city's streets. Faced with this, Thought is uncertain if they will survive. Doubt begins to creep into his mind. Rosalina notices that he is deep in thought. The place reeks of decay, likely from whatever is inside. Thought draws his blade and strikes. Rosalina covers her eyes, not wanting to witness it, but slowly she begins to open them. Thought tells her that her amulet has bothered him for some time. She needs to start believing in other things, and he removes her amulet. As soon as he takes it off, they hear a loud noise coming from downstairs. The undead are entering the house, and Thought doesn't know what to do. Rosalina says she needs to find something to use as a weapon, but she watches as Thought steps away, leaving her feeling anxious. He begins descending the stairs. Before leaving, he offers a small smile to the girl. Rosalina is worried about her friend. She tries to get up to stop him, but as he leaves, he locks the doors, leaving Rosalina alone. He ties the doors shut from the outside. He placed a dirty cloth nearby to mask her scent. Inside, she screams, begging him not to abandon her, as fear overwhelms her. But he tells her she can't rely on others and must learn to fend for herself. The zombies are already climbing the stairs. He instructs her not to make any noise, no matter what she hears. She shouldn't make a sound or move without thinking of the consequences. Rosalina covers her mouth with her hand. For him, it was better that he sacrifice himself rather than them both perishing together. Before him stood several zombies. Seeing the human, they lunged to attack. He prepares his spear, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. As he charges forward, he regrets being so hard on the girl. Rosalina, locked in the room, is helpless to stop it. She silently cries, knowing the fate that awaits Thought outside. The sky above the city now has a crimson hue. The zombies are gathered at the house. Thought couldn't withstand the assault and perished. The windows are now shattered. Outside, the priest hovers above the hordes of undead that flood the streets. He raises his hand toward the sky, ordering the undead to attack everything in sight. The citizens, armed, start blaming the city's lord for everything. As they march toward the castle, the red light intensifies. They believe it is a sign from the heavens, angry with the city's lord. As they advance, some begin to scream in terror. The crowd pauses to see what's happening, and they find an injured young man. He tells them that what's approaching is extremely dangerous. Someone rushes to help him, offering aid for his wounds. The person aiding him is a young apprentice from the city's magic tower, though just a beginner. As the apprentice tends to him, the young man says they're being attacked by the undead. He doesn't seem to be bleeding. The blood belongs to someone else. One of the men declares that the undead are closing in. The apprentice continues healing the young man's injuries, but the young man shouts in desperation, warning them that the undead are coming. The horde of zombies closes in rapidly on their position. The armed citizens realize what's heading their way. The first zombie appears, startling those nearby. Its eyes gleam with a grim glow. It tries to attack the nearest person. Before it can, a knight on horseback intervenes and strikes the zombie down. The knight tells the crowd that the zombies aren't as strong as they seem. Now they must choose, flee or stay and fight together. The crowd decides to stay and fight. The apprentices from the magic tower step forward, explaining that they were out of the city when the catastrophe occurred. Soon, more people begin volunteering. Hands rise from the crowd one after another. Seeing this, the knight declares that this is excellent. The strongest should take the front line, while the rest should form a perimeter. The sound of the zombies' approach can already be heard. The knight warns everyone that the undead are near. Numerous zombies are drawn closer to the living. The apprentices are readying their spells for battle. The knight commands them to launch their attack on the mass of zombies. A massive explosion erupts. Meanwhile, the captain still doesn't know what's happening. He is worried about Thought and Rosalina, as no one knows their whereabouts. Around a corner, he spots Rosalina sitting. He rushes to her aid. Calling her name, she slowly begins to wake. Worried, he asks what happened to her. She said that Oz saved her, but she spoke so weakly that he didn't understand. She said that he told her to stay quiet, but she ended up escaping, and because of her, Thought did what he did. The captain understands what she meant by that, and he misses the young man. He told her that he certainly isn't resentful of what she did, and it's not because of her that he perished, but because of him that she is still alive. She says that those aren't common undead, they needed help. The captain asks her to explain better what she just said. Rosalina is categorical, saying that they need the help of those knights. Of those two mysterious people who appear there suddenly, the captain says they are probably at the Lord's castle. Pulling out a potion, he told her she should take it and go to the castle. It would be much safer for her to be inside than to continue in the zombie-infested streets. He can't let her fight, not after Toth's sacrifice. He told her to find the knights for help, while he stayed there with the people to hold back the undead. Inside the castle, Patrick is impressed. The city is really a mess. Swald should take a look at how things are going, but he doesn't want to because it has nothing to do with him, to which Patrick says they are directly related to it. He can't say whether the humans have the upper hand, as Swald is only worried about how long this will last. But they don't have much time. It's only a matter of time before the humans get tired and are subdued by the undead. Swald is now more aware of the situation, and from the Lich's words, there must be another elder among the common zombies. It was time for them to return the favor to Erebos. But there's something they need to do before that. Patrick says whatever he's planning to do, he shouldn't, but Swald says it was Patrick who said the boss needed to work. The Lord is still there, looking anxiously at the monsters. Swald approaches her, asking what her name is. Stuttering, she says her name is Lala Sinivier. He introduces himself to her and says he is the Devourer. Placing one of his hands on her face, he leans closer. Looking into her eyes, he asks if she wants to live. Patrick tells him not to do this because she needs to be undead anyway. In fact, he wanted to do that, but he ended up changing his mind, though Patrick doesn't understand because he thinks the city is beyond saving. But he said they would only give up because of the undead, and the skeleton agrees. However, if they took care of them and if the Lord cooperated, there's no reason to give up on the city. He said this while still holding her. Patrick was prepared to hear something absurd, but it made a lot of sense. Using the Lord was very interesting to them. But humans are gossipers, and she might say something, though Swald knows not all of them are like that. He thinks this woman has a reason to keep living. Even knowing what he is now, she didn't stop looking at him. Really, for an ordinary human, that's admirable. All the heroes he's encountered so far had something special. Maybe she does too. And she's still sane even after seeing him, and she confirms that she has a reason to keep living. And considering this, she wouldn't do anything foolish. Patrick thinks that justification is risky, but Swald says he has a gut feeling about this, which made Patrick even more furious. But there's nothing he can do now that his boss is determined. However, if things got out of control, he would have to handle everything. Swald said he'd consider it. Swald says for him to intervene, she needs to ask him to save them, and she wants to know what will happen after that. He says the zombies will be wiped out and that Patrick will do his best to help them. Patrick was irritated when he realized he was being used as a bargaining chip. Now she wants to know what she'll need to do in return, and he plans for it to be something simple. She will have to offer everything she has to him. Offer everything to them, that's the deal. The situation is not ideal. If she refuses, she'll be killed either by them or by the zombies. But if she accepts, she'll live, though she'll end up losing everything she has. She thinks about the possible consequences of her choice. Patrick is already impatient and thinking about finishing her off. Footsteps are heard by Swald. Looking at the door, he said that someone is approaching where they are. Mel says he can block the door with magic, but Swald said there's no need to let the door be opened. She understood the message and prepared herself in case it was someone hostile. But the one who enters the hall is Rosalina. She is happy to have found him and asks the knight to help them. She said the city is overrun by zombies and that without his help, they won't be able to resist. Thought have already perished and the captain is awaiting her return. Everyone is doing their best. She begged him to help her, as he had said he was there for that purpose. She looks at him after saying those words. Soon she was startled by the skeleton behind him, who said that the Lord's choice would determine the situation. Rosalina then looks at her, sitting on the floor. The Lord asks if people are dying in the city. Patrick remembered that they must be at their limit and asked Mel's for a favor, who was also very curious. From a magic circle, a giant eye with wings emerges. She commanded the creature to go straight to the point and not deviate along the way. Now the creature flies over the city towards the barricade made by the citizens. A large screen appears in front of them. It is possible to see that the people are being overwhelmed and the zombies are numerous. This is not the scene Rosalina or the Lord wanted to see. Patrick says it won't be easy for them to stay alive much longer. Rosalina begins to despair seeing what is happening to the city. She was remembering the people who had taken her in. They were being killed by the zombies. The scene is desperate for her. She asks how Swald can do nothing in the face of this, as he is strong and could save them. Rosalina turns her attention to the Lord who is there. She asked what she was doing while the people were dying slowly, and she asked again, energetically, what she was doing. The Lord then begs Swald. She asks him to save them all, as time is running out, to do everything possible to save whoever is still alive. The sound of his firm steps echoes through the hall. He is heading towards the front line. Now that she had asked, he will do as she requested. After all, it's not something difficult to do. The three are heading toward the mass of zombies. The sound of battle fills the streets. The innkeeper is thrown to the ground by one of the zombies. He said those monsters are not weak at all. He didn't expect all of them to be wiped out easily. With a zombie approaching him, he imagines he will meet his inevitable end. Before the worst could happen, a foot smashes the head of the undead. Mel's had arrived and found it disgusting to do. She tries to clean her foot and regrets not landing on a rooftop. Seeing the new figure, the other zombies head towards her, but they are too noisy for her. A small butterfly flies toward them. A large explosion happens and more butterflies fly through the city streets. The violet-colored flames consume the undead like they were pieces of paper. It doesn't take any effort on her part. The man who was just Sega imagines she is an angel. She gets irritated by the comment he made, and as retaliation, she kicks him in the stomach. She told him to get out of there if he values his life. He runs and she says she should never have been compared to an angel. Helping humans is something she never thought she would do one day. In front of her, the Lich appears to face her. Seeing her, he recognizes that she is a demon and not a human. With so much mana and in humanoid form, she is either a dragon or a demon king. What he doesn't understand is the reason she is siding with the humans. She says she does what she wants, and an undead like him shouldn't question a king. But he says he will get the truth after he rips it from her guts. He also suggested that she become undead, as she would be much stronger. She doesn't know what he means by that, but he is certainly the most talkative undead she has ever seen. The Lich says he is the commander of that army, the darkness of the 10 malevolent ones, that he is Magus and would not lose to a demon king. Around her, grotesque creatures begin to emerge. Even so, she says she has no idea what he's talking about, because it won't be her who will face him now. Magus is a little surprised to hear that. It doesn't take long for him to feel he's being washed by an even greater evil. Swald says that he has finally found him, and he said he would make sure never to forget him. Magus knows who is in front of him. Before he could continue speaking, his face was smashed by a well-delivered punch. The force of the blow sent him flying several meters. Swald looks at the path of destruction that Magus' body left behind. Delivering that punch wasn't so bad after all. If he's right, Magus is one of the dungeon guardians. In the face of his strength, not only Mel's but also the undead that were terrified. Mel's asks if he knew the Lich, as it seemed like he had a personal grudge against him. He said that hours ago, Magus had tried to use his mana to look inside him without permission, and he should have punched him more times. In any case, staying there wouldn't help much. He wanted to know if Erebos was already in the city. She said probably not yet. In the sky, there's a barrier to trap people inside. Whoever created it must be outside, and she couldn't break the barrier, but Swald was already prepared to deal with it himself. He asked if she could handle the remaining minions, and he asked her to try to minimize human losses because they needed the city to keep functioning, and she said she could manage. Swald patted her on the head because he was going to have a conversation with Erebos now. The common zombies continue attacking. They are quite numerous in the city. The horde of undead advances non-stop. Mel's wants to know how long he will take. Swald says no more than 15 minutes, and that if it wasn't more than 20 minutes, she would manage just fine. With that, she wished him a good journey. It was time to end things. Magus said he had a hunch about this person. Then he asked if he was an ancient monster. Swald said he was partially correct, but Magus wanted to know this monster's identity. Probably Patrick's slave, he says, but Magus knows that doesn't make sense. Calling him a fool, he says Swald wouldn't have stood there in front of him doing nothing. For Magus hadn't disappointed his lord Erebos yet. Lightning begins to strike across the city. Magus needed to use that distraction to reach Erebos and tell him everything that was happening. As he retreated, he was surprised. Swald was untouched. The attack hadn't harmed him at all. Even so, that Lich continued to irritate him. Now seeing what he sees, Magus is filled with horror. The one before him is truly an ancient monster. Before him stands Swallow, the only monster capable of stopping his master's plans. So he begins to flee because things have become truly dangerous. He needs to reach Erebos as soon as possible. Trying to escape the evil that haunts him, he keeps distancing himself from the conflict. But the shadows are already above his head, and he tries to move even faster. The jaws of the shadow are closing in on him. A large mouth appears, swallowing him like a piece of candy. But even though the attack was massive, Magus is still flying freely. Swald realizes he hasn't swallowed him yet. The Lich is faster than he had imagined. Now far away, he passes through the barrier via a portal. Swald watches Magus escape. He tried to swallow him in a single bite, but couldn't. Chasing him down would be a hassle, but he couldn't just ignore what had happened. And he remembered that Mel's would hold out for about 20 minutes. Looking in her direction, he acknowledges that he's worried. With that in mind, he can't waste any more time on this situation. He gathers his energy in the palm of his hand as he assumes Erebos must be outside the barrier. If Magus really wanted to escape, he would have to stay near the castle walls. Magus looks at the intense glow forming behind him. A large explosion is building up. Swald's intention is to destroy everything in the direction Magus fled, so he should be caught in the path. A massive trail of destruction lies before him that should have been enough to deal with the Lich. Amid the destruction he caused, he can hear Patrick's complaints. He walks through the huge trench and ends up finding something. It's the Lich's body, now lying motionless on the ground. He picks him up and says the city's destruction is his fault, and he drags him along to show Patrick who was responsible for everything. At the city's edge, he finally finds the barrier that separates them from the outside world. Strong enough to withstand Mel's power. It must be a very good barrier, but he wants to know how strong it really is. But just by touching it, his hand passes through with no difficulty. However, his hand is shredded in the process. He pulls his hand back and says that it is impressive. He thinks he can pass through it, but hopes the bracelet on his arm will withstand the process. If he changes form during the process, he'll have to hear a lot from Patrick. But if everything goes wrong, he can blame Magus' corpse. He looks around curiously and confirms there are no humans nearby. Taking a few steps back from the barrier, he positions himself in front of it. Swald is ready to launch a powerful attack. He assumes an intermediate form, ready to destroy the barrier. With that done, he began running toward the barrier and collided violently with it. After the impact, a large opening appeared. The opening was big enough for the barrier to begin to break completely, and pieces of it can be seen falling from the sky. Swald walks outside the city. There were many undead there, so many that he was surprised. The zombies make unintelligible sounds. They approach the calamity ready to attack him, but just touching him makes Swald react and explode his surroundings. Near where he stands, there are several undead who are not zombies. They are Erebos' servants. That is not the proper way to treat a guest, says Swald to Erebos. One of the undead starts moving one of its many arms. A sword is stuck in the ground as soon as it finishes gesturing. The horde of zombies begins to move. The crowd advancing towards Swald is enormous. Then he realizes that this is what he should have done from the beginning. the more powerful undead present there. They simply observe him without saying a word. He throws Megas' body in their direction, saying it's a gift. From the shadows, Arevos watches what is happening. Swall says that apparently they have much to discuss now. Arevos emerges from the shadows. The figure in front of him is also an ancient monster. He asks if Swald agrees that these races should also be oppressed by humans. In response to those words, Swald says nothing. Humans are proud, rude, and selfish. Even when their lives are good, they continue invading the lands of other races, Arevos says. Swald orders him to cut the small talk and get straight to the point. Arevos wants to exterminate all humans. He also said that Swald has the strength to destroy the Empire. Arevos believed that the Empire's downfall could only happen if the capital were destroyed, and he knew that Swald attacked the capital not too long ago. If he had said so before, every demon would have been willing to help him in the process, but Swald tells him once again to get straight to the point. Arevos says that if he weren't so careless, it wouldn't have been necessary for so many demons to die. That way, they could have eliminated the humans. At this, Swald understands that Arevos is blaming him for everything he did in the city of Harston. Arevos says that's exactly right, but Swald is quick to deny it. It seems that the demon wants to exterminate the humans and Swald is standing in his way. Hearing that, Arevos says he is disappointed. There's nothing else to say about this situation but that. A large magic circle begins to form in the sky. A huge paw starts to emerge from the portal. Swald is curious because he doesn't know what it could be. It is an undead beast resembling a tapir. Contemplating the size of the creature descending from the heavens, he prepares himself and removes the bracelet from his arm that contained his form. The beast touches the ground after falling. The earth beneath it shakes with the impact. Inside the city, mells of butterflies are no longer so numerous, and the number of undead doesn't seem to have been reduced. She prepares her staff to continue attacking them. Some butterflies approach the hostile mass. They are immediately incinerated by her magic. With them so spread out, she has no choice but to move as well. Looking at the sky, she knows the barrier is almost divine level, and that it was destroying as expected of Swald. Remembering what he said, she realized that not even 3 minutes had passed yet. Behind her, a man is approaching. It's the captain. He asked her if everyone was safe. Pointing to the fire, she said if he was asking about the other humans, they are burning there. Almost collapsing, he asked if she was with the knights as well. The one in armor and the other who looks like a wanderer. But she says she is not their companion. She is actually a servant and nowhere near their greatness. Realizing they are together, he is happy that Rosalina succeeded in asking for help. Thought didn't sacrifice himself in vain, the city would be saved. He tells her that soon he will also become undead. She says she knows that, and even though she's not in a position to ask, she would like to request a favor from him. Melz observes him in his final moments. Looking more closely, he realizes she isn't human. Regardless, that doesn't matter now. If there was a weapon nearby, he would like her to give it to him. Melz ponders his request. The captain is already on the ground, completely drained of strength. A spear is thrown into the ground before him. He is a warrior, and Melz knows that. Finally, the captain takes the spear in his hands and uses it for what he intended. Up in the sky, Melz notices a sinister aura ahead. The ground has been churned by the impact. The giant elephant is standing, searching for Swald. Another strange figure appeared. With little effort, Swald throws it far away, as Arevos, who was watching from a distance, expected. Swald truly deserves the title of an ancient monster. He looks at the giant elephant and realizes that his core is different from the others. The beast attacks, launching several blasts. It was so fast that Swald couldn't dodge. He quickly noticed that one of his legs was forming swollen wounds. A great magic is summoned from the heavens, the Fangs of Malice. A divine-class spell, not even an ancient monster would be able to resist it. Arevos watches the destruction unfold before him. It was definitely marvelous to see. The zombies continue advancing. Despite being the target of a powerful spell, Swald remains composed. However, Arevos has doubts about what's happening. Watching from afar, he imagines things are going well. He now believes that he will finally defeat the ancient beast. With that, he aims to fill the entire land with undead, thus attaining the position of ruler over everything and everyone. Another attack is heading towards Swald, just like the first one struck him. To Arevos, the beast should be grateful for the chance to leave after so many years with nothing to do in life. The anchors that were embedded in the beast suddenly begin to explode. At this, Swald's eyes change color, returning to their traditional yellow. It's his turn to react to the attacks and do something. It didn't take long for a massive explosion of gigantic proportions to occur. That which had bound the beast and was embedded in its body no longer exists, as it had been shattered. Arevos could only watch in disbelief. Swald remarked that it hurt enough that he wouldn't want to be hit by that attack again. Now it dawns on Arevos, it wasn't he who struck the beast, but the beast who allowed him to do all of this. Arevos strikes a nearby tree. Some of his subordinates are confused by what they're seeing because he actually struck a tree. Lord of all death looks at his hand. Swald thinks he's gone mad, as he also doesn't understand why he attacked the tree. However, he asks if that was the most powerful magic Arevos had, because if that was all, there wasn't much else to be done. Arevos' rage stems from understanding that Swald let himself be hit just to gauge the strength of his attacker. It's obvious now that Erebos doesn't stand a chance in this fight, and he knows he needs to get out of there. He was too hasty, ruining his plans. He needs to create a distraction and flee immediately. Swald approaches, remarking about the magic that Erebos didn't respond to, and says he had spoken to him. He was firm, telling Erebos not to come up with any more stupid ideas. If Erebos had a more powerful attack than that, now would be the time to use it. Erebos stands before the ancient beast, completely powerless. Even so, he says nothing, to which Swald asks why the silence. The only conclusion is that Erebos has nothing left up his sleeve, no stronger attack to use. But amid the silence, something begins to emerge from Erebos' chest. The pillars still remaining in the sky begin to descend. It only takes the ancient beast to move slightly to defend itself. And it even commented that the predictability was so great, it was as if they were reading the same script. One of the pillars was thrown far away. The same fate befell the other one. Erebos imagines that his distraction worked. Swald was bound by magical chains. That type of enchantment is what he hates most, and he began to agonize. A green circle was forming on the body of the zombie elephant. Looking at it, Swald imagines it's another divine class spell, and even so, the animal was incredibly resilient. Trapped, he would be attacked with no chance to defend himself. Even so, the attack happens, and he complains that it was a very dirty move. Now in his human form, walking calmly, he says that it's far too disgusting. But since things have progressed to this point, he can take her seriously now. Whatever was controlling the reanimated body of the zombie elephant has no idea what's happening. A massive head emerges from the ground to swallow it. Out of range, Erebos continues watching without fleeing. The enormous head devours everything in its path like a small snack. There's nothing to be said in the face of such an atrocious scene. Just as it appeared from the ground, it recedes back into it. Swald returns to his human form. Meanwhile, Erebos still watches without making a move. Looking at him, Swald remarks that maybe it's time to replace the boss of one of the 7 great dungeons. The people continue trying to survive in the city. Rosalina and the Lord hear Patrick talking to himself. He feels like his boss has forgotten that he is a calamity and things could get worse. He'll be the one tasked with cleaning up the mess afterward. A loud noise causes them to take cover. The Lord asks what is happening. Patrick, despondent, says that his boss is causing a mess, meaning he's handling the undead army. She asks if that means Harston will be saved. In a way, yes, but not in the way she thinks, as his bones are shivering. At least there are no more undead in the city. Mel's had taken care of most of them. She approaches them and says that it was quite exhausting. It had been a long time since she used so much mana, and Patrick thanks her for her efforts, saying that without her, things would have been different. Despite this, she says Swald did most of the work, but Patrick is adamant that she did something better. Mel's asks if he's finished yet, but Patrick says the fight is still ongoing. That power is something to behold, and thinking about the aftermath is even worse. The skeleton laments as his boss always causes more work every time he tries to fix something. After this, there will be plenty of work for him for sure. Swald only needed to step on them a few times, but instead he's doing something worse. Patrick is upset because he will have to deal with it all. Someone calls out to Rosalina, who was watching the battle from afar. She turned to see who was calling her. The skeleton said the only person they promised to keep alive there was the Lord. So it was time for him to begin the cleanup now. There's no purpose in leaving more people alive in that place except for the Lord. She intervenes, saying that the girl is one of her subordinates. The skeleton looks at them both threateningly. With good humor, he says it's fine, there's no need for all of that. It's not like she can do much for herself anyway, since the thieves who took her in are no longer alive. And with her mind in that state, there's not much else to be done. Acting against her could make the Lord react worse than he imagines. That would be a problem they don't want to create. So things will go as they were defined, and he called for Mel's, who was resting on the ground. He wants to know if she can put someone to sleep, and she said yes, asking who. Patrick says he'd like to speak to the Lord alone. Immediately, Mel's puts Rosalina to sleep with magic. Now they would begin their conversation. It was time for her to fulfill her part of the promise, and the Lord wants to know what she must do. She should not tell anyone what she has seen so far, and Patrick says she must have realized that without him meaning to tell her. He was going to tell her a story now about a lord who received all kinds of insults for wanting to save his land. Upon seeing the undead attack, he did everything he could to protect them. But there were few soldiers, and he could only ask for help. He didn't get the help in time, and the people criticized him even more as the undead advanced. His only option was to hold out firmly. After a long wait, reinforcements from the Empire arrived and drove the undead away. And with that, the territory was saved. End of this wonderful story. She was in a frightened lord who hid away, but someone who sacrificed herself to save her people. The Lord asks if she should lie. Patrick points to the city. He says she mentioned before that she wanted to live. With those words, she understands what she needs to do now. He tells her to distribute supplies to the survivors and that soon help from other cities would arrive. She doesn't know if that will happen, but Patrick says he will take care of the rest because the young Lord of Harston is a heroine. Even after hearing that, she still feels a bit apprehensive. The silence is now enormous, so Swald must have finished everything. He suggests that Mel's teleport them, but she's used so much mana that she might not be able to do it. Seeing that they are about to leave, the Lord wishes to ask them something. What was their intention in saving this city? Since they are dungeon monsters, it wasn't for the lives of the people. Patrick says she wanted to live and should know her place and not ask so many questions. Swald remarks that it's about time to replace one of the 7 great dungeons, and he feels a little sorry for Arevos, because all of this could have been avoided if he had just stayed quiet somewhere. He says his back has been pierced so many times that it's starting to itch. Arevos says he is once again impressed by the strength of the ancient beast, but Swald says he doesn't care about that. Now he wants to know why it had to be Harston, because if it hadn't been that city, he wouldn't have had to intervene. Arevos says it was the best location to attack the Empire's capital, but that's not what Swald wants to hear. That means Arevos came here knowing who owned this territory. Arevos, on the other hand, asks if Swald knows the real reason. A great magic begins to form behind him. Seeing what is starting to appear, Swald changes his stance. Several spikes emerge from the undead's body. Swald continues to observe him carefully, and now the Lich is laughing uncontrollably. More magic circles appear behind him, and a massive explosion occurs, engulfing Arevos completely. When it ends, a head falls with no body to hold it. Swald realizes Arevos wasn't trying to use teleportation magic. Taking the head, he says it wouldn't have mattered, as Arevos was going to meet his end anyway. He looks back to survey the place. Everywhere he looks, there's destruction. The destruction is so extensive that he realizes what he's done. Something needs to be done because the place has become useless. This time, it's Swald who starts to feel a chill. Mel's had arrived, and with her, Patrick too. The skeleton calls out to him and Swald's expression changes, knowing he's in trouble. Patrick tells him not to move as he's coming over, saying he missed him. This is the proof he needed to confirm he's really in deep trouble. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.